Okay, I think I'm live. So, a couple of things before I get started, and then I'm just going to dive right into it. Obviously, I'm in a closet. It's just the quietest place in my house. It's not glamorous looking, and I don't really care. Um, this is the memoir. So, it's a little book. Full disclosure, there are some grammar typo mistakes in this book. I started writing it like right after my son passed because I just did not know what else to do with myself and just wanted to get it down. Because I was having so many memory issues, like my brain was trying to block everything out, and I just wanted to write everything down while I still had a clear memory of it. But at some point, I was debating on if I wanted to write about his funeral or if I wanted this book to be present at his funeral. And I ultimately chose the second one, where it was like, okay, I just want this to be at the funeral. That was 2 months after he died. I reread it, tried to catch all the grammar mistakes, and some slipped through the cracks. And that's just, I can live with that, because I'd rather have him than this book. But this book is what I have, and I just want it to be something that exists. I'm guessing it's gonna take about 2, maybe 3 hours to get through this whole thing. So I'm just gonna talk for another minute and then dive right into it. Um, so so this is my Michael Bear. Um, he's a Comfort Cub. I believe that's the name of the company, Comfort Cub. They donate weighted teddy bears to lost parents, as I am now classified as. I just like to keep him around. I like to take family photos with him. He's kind of my stand-in. And then this blankie is from the hospital. I got two blankies. One was, oh God. Okay, one was the one he was wrapped in. I have it and it's in a plastic bag because I'm not gonna wash it. But this one they intentionally gave to me fresh so I could wash it and cuddle with it. So yeah, Michael Bear just stays in that. Yeah, got my water. And then this is a tattoo I have for him. These are his actual footprints, but they are twice the size of what they are in reality. In reality, they were maybe about this big. The hospital printed them for me. They didn't give me his handprints. I'm assuming because his fingers probably weren't coming apart. He was 25 weeks when I lost him. And then just when I got the tattoo, they just blew it up, and I was like, I don't really care. They'll probably tell me tattoos things like, oh, if you get it too small, it'll warp, blah blah blah. So I was like, okay, whatever. It's there. So yeah. I'm just gonna try to get through this as much as possible without needing any breaks. So just I guess one more drink of water and we'll go. So I don't have like a dedication on this book. Post this happening now, all my books I just say are dedicated to Michael. This one I thought it was redundant because I'm like, who else is it going to be dedicated to? So okay, yeah, there's 8 chapters. It's about 80 pages. Um, so let's talk prologue. I've had to ask myself why I wanted to write this book, why I feel the need to share something so personal with others in the world. Why do artists in general feel the need to share their pain? I have never shielded anything away from doing what was best for the story, even if it meant terrible things for the characters. But this is not a story, and Michael is not a character. Michael is my son. He lived within me for 25 weeks before the doctors could no longer find his heartbeat. To say that losing him has been the hardest situation I have ever dealt with would be an understatement. It is the very definition of hell. But why do I feel the need to share all of this? My journey, not only of the loss of my son, but also how and why I came to be pregnant with him in the first place. Why do I feel that this will bring me catharsis? Yes, this book will be shared with family members and close friends, but what do I have to gain from complete strangers reading about this part of my life? I ask again why artists have a need to share their pain. I say artists in particular because I believe it is human nature to discuss our tribulations with others. It isn't difficult to go online and find blogs where people will describe their difficult experiences with one another. Responses tend to bring up advice or solace in the idea that none of them are alone. Yet artists can create from our pain. We draw, sing, or write. I understand that we want to share our pain the same as everyone else, but why do we feel the need to create? Why is simply talking about this not enough? Why do we make art so others feel less alone? Is it only for ourselves and the closure we hope to gain from it? Who is it all for? I think of the song Hello by Evanescence. Context for those unaware, although I'm sure most of you are aware. When the band's lead singer, Amy Lee, was a young girl, her baby sister unexpectedly passed away. Hello is a song reflecting this time in her life. It's a song available on her album, but is one she refuses to sing live. I can't pretend to understand the inner workings of a celebrity. However, it is a song and concept I have always wondered about. Why would she write about such a personal matter, especially if it was one she couldn't bring herself to sing live? Why let her audience in on this aspect of her life? In one interview, Amy explained that this was her way of honoring her sister, and I now understand the logic completely. I could say that this book is for me, that I feel I cannot move on to new projects until I've made something in dedication to my son. Excuse me. I could say that it's for you, that I want to reach out to others with my own solace, that you are not alone, that the emotions behind this grief are complicated and you are not the only one feeling them. But at the end of this day, I want this book to be for Michael. I want his life to have an impact on others. If he had survived, I know he would have been the highlight in someone's life, just like he was in mine. Others would have come to know him. He would have had friends and interests and hobbies. All these would have had a lasting impact on someone else's memory. And I don't want that impact to fade. My son can't do it on his own. I have to do it for him. His name is Michael, and I want you to know that. All right, so chapter one is called Baby Fever. So this is kind of my journey up to getting pregnant. So I started working in daycares and preschools back in 2014. At the time of writing this, I have worked professionally with children for 11 years, and I have had baby fever the entire time. I should mention right now that it has never been my intention to work with kids for so long. In my youth, I wanted to be a professional artist, and I still do. But I couldn't find a job in my field after college, a typical song and dance for millennials, so I settled for something else in the meantime. I had done enough retail to know that it wasn't for me and decided to see how working with kids would go. I did a fair share of babysitting growing up, which meant it wasn't completely new to me, but I ended up falling in love with it. As I continued with my career in daycare, the ages I looked after became younger. I had initially started off with preschool age, around 4 or 5 years old. I had thought that the older kids might be easier to handle since they could talk and were typically potty trained, and oh, I had a very rude awakening with that. I quickly realized how low my tolerance was for things like tattletaling. I cannot handle tattletaling. I don't know what it is about a child coming to you and complaining that so and so doesn't want to be my friend anymore, which irked me beyond measure, but it did. So I moved on to toddlers, and that was much easier. Then eventually I moved on to infants. I had a patience for things like a colicky baby, which I didn't have for tattletaling, and I don't know what the logic is, but there you go. Then eventually, oh, I already read that. Not everyone understood this line of logic, but it worked for me. A baby could only cry to communicate. It was hard to get mad at them for it. But preschool students often ask questions which are too big for them to understand the answer to. And to this day, I have difficulty figuring out how to put complex ideas into a child friendly phrasing. I loved working within the infant classrooms. I was fully immersed in my element when it came to babies. I've done everything you could think of 1,000 times over: bottle feeding, diaper changing, rocking to sleep. As I got to know them, their mannerisms, their schedules, it became easier to determine what their cries could mean. I one time had a pair of twins in my class who were so set on their schedule, I could determine what the problem was by one cry. Often it was hunger or needing a nap, and if neither of those fit the time, I knew they were sick. I was just in sync with these two. I don't recall when exactly it was I decided I for sure wanted kids of my own, but if I had to guess, it would have been at some point in my second daycare job. I had 5 toddlers in my class and I loved them all. After these many years, they remain my favorite class. I think almost anyone in the field can attest to the fact that you become attached to the kids. When you're the one caring for them 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, it's difficult not to put emotional energy into it. The hardest part of the job, at least in my opinion, is when the kids leave. Either they graduate from your class, move away, or you move. I'd like to say that this gets easier over time, but for me, it never did. You become attached to a child, yes, but sometimes they would also become attached to you. And we can never understand the reasoning or logic behind a baby's choice, but sometimes you would become their favorite teacher and there would seem to be no explanation as to why. Admittedly, this could be problematic at times. A baby who has decided you're the favorite may become jealous if you're caring for another infant, or just flat out upset when you aren't holding them all the time. Another teacher can help, yes, but you're the one they want. As frustrating as this can become, there always remains a part of me which felt special due to this. The relationships I had over the years both quenched and kindled my baby fever. There were times in my life where clocking into work, coddling babies, and then going home was enough. Mostly, however, it made me feel empty inside. As I became older, the start of this was in my early 20s, and now I'm in my mid 30s. The baby fever only grew. I realized that I had wanted this emotional energy in my personal life. That is to say, I wanted a child I could take home and raise. I wanted a child who I didn't have to give back to at the end of the day. I wanted a child I never had to say goodbye to. That was, I think, one of the biggest middle fingers the universe gave me when I wished for a child I would never have to say goodbye to, and then I had to say the ultimate goodbye. Excuse me one moment. Okay. I had also moved from my home state of Indiana to California. This is relevant because in Indiana, at least in 2014, you did not need special training to work with children. If you had prior experience, such as babysitting or your own children, you could pretty much consider yourself hired. In California, however, you needed 12 early childhood education units, which meant taking at least 4 college level courses. This meant that despite my prior 2 years working as a daycare teacher, I could only get nannying jobs once I moved out. I was essentially playing house during this time. Instead of having lesson plans or art projects, I was taking kids out for walks to the park and trips to the zoo. I would rock them to sleep for their naps and lie them in their own cribs. While they slept, I would get to eat lunch and work on my own creative projects. I would just monitor them with a baby camera. I gave them medicine when they were sick. I gave them cuddles when they were hurt or scared. I helped them overcome arguments with each other. I would think to myself that this is what it would be like as a mom, that I had found a balance between the kids and my own personal pursuits. Nannying had been one of the more laid back career avenues I have ever explored. However, there are drawbacks. The pay may not be great and there are no benefits. The experience also depends on the parents because your clients are also your bosses, and some are better at compromise than others. I knew that I would not be able to stay in this field long term, so I registered at the local community college in order to get my ECE units. I thought that going back to to traditional daycares would be the solution. I thought that we would have an HR department and there would be regulations in place to ensure the employees were happy, and I was wrong, and that's a story for another time. I have many opinions on the current state of education in America, including early education, but that's not what this book is about. It's about Michael and his journey began all those years ago. When I eventually did go back to traditional daycares, I only applied for infant rooms. On and on, I continued to learn more about caring for babies. I learned what are typical behaviors for certain milestones. Every child is different, but sometimes factors can impact the way they grow. I also learned more signs for the typical types of diseases children caught. I could tell the difference between a fever caused by infection and a fever caused by teething. I learned about the many different personalities a baby could have and how to manage them, how to keep babies entertained or calm if they became colicky. What types of food babies tend to prefer, or the foods to avoid until certain ages. I could even see the impact COVID had on them. How after wearing masks over an extended period of time, babies were taking longer to learn how to talk. They rely on watching adults move their lips to figure out speech, and without that visual, a baby's first words went from being around 9 months to almost 2 years, which I still see this impact. I had felt like such an expert on children that when I became a mom, I would see things that and know things that most didn't. I would not fall for scams such as baby wipe heaters, which can grow mold. Please just don't buy baby wipe heaters. Like, there is no reason to, just none. Or distilled baby water. I would avoid things like screen time until my child was around 3 years old. I know that they said that FaceTime's okay, but that's just to make the COVID parents feel better. Screen time should be restricted, period. We would watch vintage shows because modern ones move too fast. I would sleep train my child to light and noise so they wouldn't be bothered by people talking at nap time. I had it all planned out. I just didn't have a baby yet. That's when another emotion began to set in, the jealousy. I felt jealous of every couple with a child, how they would come to pick up their kids and leave with the family while I went home by myself. Some of those parents didn't even want their kids. When you work in childcare long enough, you see all kinds of parenting styles, and you will see the uninvolved, that is, the ones who feed, clean, and clothe their children, but nothing more. Parents who consider their children to be a burden, something that is impeding their free spirited lifestyle. I have sympathy towards regretful parents. It's the reason I have always been against the notion of telling people that they must have kids in order to live a complete life. When a parent regrets having a child, everyone loses. But I also felt such a level of jealousy and even anger. I'm just being full frontal honest in this book. Not all of my emotions are pretty or packageable. But they're true. I was desperate for a baby, and these people didn't even want theirs. I also became jealous over how easily starting a family seemed to come for some people. Parents at the daycare would share their stories. Some would be difficult, such as complications during labor, but more often than not, although this is probably just my own memory, it seemed like having children was second nature. A young couple would have a toddler at our school and a second child on the way. Friends and family were starting to get pregnant, and they would brag about how it happened on the first try. Please don't brag about that, by the way, unless you are with people who already have children. If you're with your single friends or your friends trying to get pregnant, please don't brag about how you got pregnant on the first try. It is not pretty what we feel when you say that. I would hear stories about people having one night stands and getting their children that way. Meanwhile, I was nowhere near financially stable enough to afford fertility treatment that I needed. Some of my friends, mostly straight ones, asked why I didn't just find a guy and go about it the natural way. And as a lesbian, I told them that I would rather swallow hot coals than sleep with a man. And I still feel that way. They didn't understand that I wanted to know as little about my donor as humanly possible, that I only wanted to know the bare bones about him, and how to me he was only the second half of the DNA and not a full person, let alone the father of my child. Going to the baby aisle in stores was painful. Still, I would browse around and take notes of the brands I had become familiar with. I would read prices of things like cribs or strollers so I would have an idea of what to expect. I would hold up the baby clothes and think to myself, someday. Then I would feel the jealousy in the pit of my stomach whenever a couple came by with their own small infant. So often these trips would leave me angry at my own body, and I would break down into tears. It's petty, yes, but I may as well be honest about the ugly truths in this. At the time, I had felt trapped. I had thought that going back to school and returning to daycares would be an investment, that I would be able to bring my child to work and get the 50% employees discount for care. But a few more years passed, and I realized that there was no forward advancement in this line of work, that my raises would be far few and in between, and that my vacation time would be even less. A consultation with the fertility clinic would cost around $300. Now, at the time of writing this, okay, I do live in California, and July of last year, our governor passed the law that now fertility treatment is covered under insurance, which is huge. But at the time of writing this, that was not currently happening. So I was paying out of pocket. But yeah, consultation with the fertility clinic would cost around $300. There was no way I would be able to afford simply talking to a doctor. Sperm banks cost between $1,000 to $3,000. Some work only with fertility clinics and do not ship out to residential areas. At least that was the case when I had originally started looking into it. I decided to go back to school again, this time with a more ambitious goal. I was going to study to be a teacher. I know that the stereotype is how poorly paid teachers are, but teachers make hourly minimum wage. The thought of a salary plus long breaks with a shorter work day was far too appealing to me. I would finally be able to get started on my fertility treatment. It took 2 years for me to earn a credential. The first year was the last half of 2020. I had my eyes set on a local university that my friends had attended. The school required me to take prerequisite courses, which I did at the community college, as well as pass several tests. In the end, I was accepted into the program, but there was a catch. As I said, this was the end of 2020, and most schools were still practicing distance learning. However, by the time I had finished the prerequisites and the test, it was near the start of 2022 and quite a few schools had opened back up. Suddenly, the university I had planned to go to from beginning went from being an online option to a 2 year in person program, and I still needed to work in order to pay my bills, so becoming a full time student was not an option for me. This was not a determined. I simply went online and looked for an accredited virtual academy, and my search was short. I was accepted soon after registering. Then I spent the next year balancing work and school. This happened in July of 2022, and by August of the following year, I had my first teaching job. I did all of this just to be able to start my family. I will admit right now, I have never possessed any ambitions of becoming a teacher, especially for long term. Both of my parents are teachers, and I grew up seeing the stress they endured. The career had never appealed to me, and I still had dreams of becoming a professional artist. But after 10 years of rejection letters, you start to wonder how good you actually are. I felt like I was settling in life, but it was okay because now I would be able to start my fertility treatment. My first paycheck was more money than I have ever put in my bank account before. Immediately, I scheduled my consultation with the clinic. The $300 copay no longer an intimidation. Once there, they explained in great detail the various tests they would require to move forward and how much each would cost. Even though I was making more money, I did most of these through the hospital where I had insurance. The my back. Okay, I'm going to try to lean back for a bit. Okay. The downside to this was that my doctors took significantly longer to book appointments. I needed to do an HSC dye test, which is an extremely uncomfortable way to see if both of your tubes are open, and I ended up needing to book this procedure twice. Since it involves shooting dye into your uterus, the doctors need documentation to verify that you aren't already pregnant. The first time I had gone in, my OB had told me that an at home test was enough. I didn't understand how the hospital would have records of this. Was I meant to take the test with me? But I had trusted her. I'm going to say that a lot, but I had trusted the doctors. Don't you love when doctors tell you, "Oh, we don't know. It's hard to tell. We don't know." And then the people who do know are the ones trying to sell you snake oil? Like, it's like, okay, cool. I don't know the solution. I guess I'll go to medical school and then Google will give me the right answers. Oh, I don't. I want my tattoo to be showing while I read. Okay, good enough. Sure enough, however, my instincts had been correct and they could not do the procedure unless I had done a pregnancy test through the hospital. It took another 2 months before I was able to go back, and I had to return 24 hours before the actual procedure for the pregnancy test. They discovered that both of my tubes worked fine, but I had polyps, which meant I had to schedule surgery to have these removed. I often think about the friends who told me to skip treatment and find some guy to sleep with. I think about how if I had done that, then these polyps would have gone undetected and my child would have died much, much sooner. The polyps were discovered in May, but the hospital could not schedule my surgery until August. This greatly upset me because it had been nearly a year since I had started treatment. When I had first gone in for my consultation, I had asked the clinician how long this process would take. She said something to the effects of a few months at best. There was the option to do all of these tests through the clinic itself, but they were highly expensive. The wait and the price of it all was frustrating me. I could have even done my polyp removal surgery through the clinic, but they gave me a quote of $3,000. I thought that surely the hospital I had insurance with would be cheaper, so I went ahead with the later schedule. No one at the hospital had ever actually given me a quote, however. It wasn't until I went in the morning of my surgery that they told me it would cost $5,000, and I was furious. I could have paid less to have the surgery done sooner. Why had no one told me? On top of that, one of the surgeons asked why I had waited so long. Like, I'm literally lying there about to get surgery, and he's like, "Oh, you got diagnosed back in May. Why did you wait so long?" And this man was most likely unaware of the situation, but it was 5 a.m. I hadn't eaten breakfast because of the anesthesia, and I was just told I was going to be paying double for my patients. I looked him in the eye and said that they were the ones who made me wait. Like, I literally just looked at this man, 7 levels of frustration, just like, y'all made me wait. So, I'm normally not a Karen, but I was like, dude, why would you ask me that? Like, why do you think I scheduled so late? Fortunately, the surgery was a success. Furthermore, I was able to set up a financial aid plan with my hospital, and my medical debt was forgiven. After that, I was finally ready to move on to the last step. I was finally ready to try and get pregnant. Now, do keep in mind it was August of 2024. I had already picked and paid for a donor back in February. I remember it at the time because it was when my nephew was born and I was visiting. How the process works is that the clinic has a partnership with a few different sperm banks. You search through the potential donors and you pick out a couple that you like. You then send these profiles over to the clinic and the nurses screen them for genetic diseases. Unfortunately, my top choice guy had none, so I purchased the sperm and had it shipped to the clinic. This was the first time in my life I had been looking at profiles of men with any level of interest. It feels weird at first to be looking through somebody solely for their genes. You want to think that you'll love your child no matter what, and that somehow this feels like designer baby. But then how do you choose? I didn't have any interest in athletic donors, and that was considered a highly desirable trait, considering how many of them there were. I instead looked at the ones who emphasized their artistic abilities. There was a holding fee, and if you don't pay it every month, the clinic gets rid of the vial. This also added to my frustrations with my surgery taking so long to get done. So I'm basically paying the clinic, like, I think it was $150 every month until I got that polyp surgery. So now at last, it was August of 2024. We had to wait for me to ovulate. I had been tracking my cycle, originally using an app on my phone, but I found that it was typically inaccurate. Like, the predictions were just wrong. I started to track my cycle using a thermometer and ovulation strips, which were much more reliable. Interestingly enough, I discovered that my temperature actually dropped instead of raised when I ovulated. That's like you go up like a degree or two when you ovulate, but I actually went down. Um, I went in that month being told that my appointments would be Friday and Saturday. That's relevant. When you're ready to start trying, the clinic gives you pills to help increase the chances of ovulation. They also can give you something called a trigger shot, which has an impact as well. They order these from pharmacies they work with, and then you have to pick them up and bring them in. I was there that Friday, trigger shot in hand, expecting them to give it to me so I would be ready for Saturday. But they did an ultrasound on me first, which they charged an additional $500. They make you take like two ultrasounds before they even do anything. So it's like both of those cost $500. And then the procedure of like whatever it is they're doing, be it insemination, is like $600. So it was way too easy to spend nearly $2,000 like over the course of a weekend at this place, and decided that I wasn't close enough to ovulation yet. They said my follicles were too small. They told me to come back on Sunday. I was hesitant since I was supposed to go in the following day, but I did as instructed. When I went back that Sunday, they had discovered that I had already ovulated and that it was too late to try again this cycle. I was inconsolable, especially considering that I was originally meant to go in that Saturday. I had put all of this time, effort, and money. I had gone through surgeries, hormone treatment, tracking my cycles, and for what? I again thought of the people I knew who seemed to get pregnant easily, and my jealousy spiked. I didn't understand why this was difficult for me when I had wanted so badly for so long. Eventually, I calmed down and waited another month. This time, the clinicians were aware that I ovulated quicker than the average person, which I still have to advocate for myself. When I go in and they're like, no, no, you're going to come back in like 2, 3 days. And I go, no, no, you're going to do it now. You're going to do it now. And then they're like, I don't know. But then I'm correct. I went in one day, they gave me the trigger shot, and then I came back the following day for my IUI. The prospect that there was now a legitimate chance of me being pregnant both exhilarated and scared me. After all, this was the first time in my life it might actually happen. They told me to lie down for 10 minutes and that it didn't matter if any sperm fell out. I highly disagree with that sentiment, but that's what I had done. We're on page 15 of chapter 1, and I am noticing the trend of like, I trusted the doctors. If I seem way too happy, I'm just masking. Okay. My brain is like just completely shutting down the gravity of the situation that I am reading. And also, this is the early days. It's not super triggering for me yet. I indeed felt a large amount fall out, though, and I became worried. I asked my friends what their first signs of pregnancy was, if they were similar to PMS, because that's what I had been feeling at the time. I went as far as to get the early pregnancy tests, which all came back negative. These weren't the most reliable, or so I had been told, and that it would be best to wait until my cycle skipped before officially testing. Sure enough, a few weeks later, I had gotten my period. Words cannot express my disappointment. I had been hoping for it to happen on the first try for a variety of reasons. One was the obvious of just wanting to finally get the ball rolling already. The second had been that my funds were running low and I had gone from a teaching position back to a nanny one. It's a long story. The donor I had selected had been sold out, so I had to pick a new one. Originally, I had gone with one who didn't have any prior pregnancies. This would be a closed and anonymous process, but I was thinking about the questions my child might have in the future. How would they feel about having half siblings around the states, potentially the world? But between the clinic visits and purchasing the sperm itself, I had felt about $2,000 fall out of me the month prior. I chucked these morals to the wind, deciding that I would deal with it when the time came and pick someone who did have prior pregnancies. I also read up on what others did to get pregnant. Turns out there are some pretty strange tactics, such as taking Mucinex in order to decrease the amount of mucus in your vagina, which I have mixed feelings on, and I have yet to actually try it. I was advised against this one, but some people swear by it. I got off of certain medications that I've been taking, which were said to have a negative impact on fertility, mainly melatonin. I was taking prenatal gummies with folic acid. I ended up trying this herbal tea, which claimed to help, but most significantly, I used a conception cup. This is a silicone device which works similar to a period cup, but it's shorter and gets closer to your cervix. The idea is that it prevents sperm from falling out too quickly. Again, there's not a lot of scientific research to back up claims, but several couples say that it works. I understood the logic behind it and felt that I had nothing to lose. I'll never forget the day I went in for my second round because it was on Thanksgiving. I cooked the entire spread on Thanksgiving and had to time it so I would be able to go to my appointment and back to finish. I made quite a few distasteful jokes about the fact that I was attempting pregnancy on such a holiday. Valentine's Day made sense, and it's almost a stereotype that couples conceive on that day, but Thanksgiving, it was begging for jokes to be made. Something about like, oh, my turkey's not the only thing getting basted today. It was stuff like that. The clinician had tried once again to tell me to come back a day later, but I explained what had happened a few months prior. Unfortunately, a nurse who had been there defended my case. Everything was said and done that afternoon. I laid there for 10 minutes and inserted the conception cup. The instructions were to keep it in for no longer than a half hour, but I ended up going nearly 2. I wanted to be sure. A few weeks later, I got what I thought was my period. That is to say, I was bleeding. Yet it wasn't like my normal period. It was much lighter than I typically had and cleared out after 2 days. I looked up the symptoms for implantation bleeding, but after waiting for so long and trying, and especially after the first round had failed, I didn't want to get my hopes up. I remember thinking that my PMS symptoms had been different. They were similar to general PMS symptoms. They just weren't the ones that I experienced in the past. Media often portrays the first sign of a character getting pregnant is with morning sickness. This actually happens about 6 weeks into the pregnancy. It's truthfully not the first symptom, it's just the only symptom early that doesn't also correlate with PMS. The first symptom I had was a craving for ham. I like ham well enough, but this was intense. I would have sold my soul for ham, and it didn't go away. I got pimples everywhere. My breasts also felt tender, but this was something I had experienced the month prior, so again, I did not want to get my hopes up. I would be able to officially test on a Saturday. Ovulation tests often come with a pregnancy one, so I had it ready to go. I'm not sure what happened that morning, but the test broke. Like just I wake up first thing Saturday, it's like 7 a.m. and I go and try to take the test and it just somehow breaks. I don't know how else to phrase it. It just broke. Neither of the lines appeared. At peak frustration, I went down to our nearest Walgreens and purchased another. I sat back in that bathroom and tried again. This time, 2 lines appeared instantly. I sat there for another few minutes, not believing the sight. I began crying tears of joy, whispering to myself, really? Over and over again. It had finally happened. I was pregnant. All right, then chapter 2 is the pregnancy. Okay. And we're about a half hour in. So, yeah, I'm thinking it's going to be another 2 hours before we're done. So, but that's okay. We're still on the happy chapters. The first thing I did was tell everyone living in my apartment. They knew about my journey to get to this point and they deserved to be the first to know. Now with my timing, having conceived on Thanksgiving meant that I was going to be at the very early stages of pregnancy around Christmas. I wanted so badly to go home and tell my family the good news, but I had always heard that it was best to wait until 10 weeks as chances of miscarriage decreased after such a time. When I went home that holiday season, I was barely 5 weeks. It would be the only Christmas my son would spend with his family, and they didn't even know. I don't regret keeping him to myself, as difficult as it was to do so. I was starting to experience morning sickness and food aversions. I wanted sympathy, but everyone thought I was just being my usual picky self again. I had a phone appointment with my OB about next steps. I had to sneak the phone call so no one would hear me. I had been so excited. The first few days of my trip were the toughest. I took a shower one night to discover that I had brown discharge. I tried to Google an answer, but nothing substantial was coming up. Then that night, I got up to use the bathroom and found that I was bleeding. I panicked, but I didn't know what to do. It was 1 in the morning, and I was far from my doctors, and my family had no idea. I texted my roommates that I had had a miscarriage and went back to bed. I didn't sleep at all that night. I had just laid there as the hours passed. When my family was at church, I called around. First, my best friend had a long cry about it, then my fertility clinic, and finally, my doctors. It felt so unfair to be having this conversation hours after discussing next steps. I felt like I was being punished, that the universe was angry at me for trying and wanting so hard to have a child. Was it because I was gay and single? Is this what I deserved? I still ask myself these questions. I still think the universe is out to get me. I know that's like peak magical thinking, but like when you can't find logical answers, it's just what the human brain does. Afterwards, I did a little more research. I found out that miscarriages make you bleed for a significantly longer time and in a much greater abundance than I had. And now I've actually had a miscarriage. So this is my stillborn. And then in December of last year, 2025, I had a miscarriage. So now I do know what a miscarriage looks like. My symptoms fit better with that of a subchronic hemorrhage. I probably did not say that right, and I don't care. I spelled it right. I was scared to get my hopes up. I didn't want to believe that my baby might still be alive if it all meant that he had to die again. I was anxious to get home and set up the earliest appointment I could. My best friend went with me. They did an ultrasound, and that was the first time I saw my son. He was a tiny little bean, but he had a heartbeat. A strong one was what the doctors always said. Congratulations, I was told you are still pregnant. That's my baby? I had asked in disbelief, not just over how I had been wrong about a miscarriage, but also about the fact that there was a tiny person growing inside me. I used to talk to my body. I would ask, "Are you in there? I can't wait to meet you." And now that question was finally being answered. Listening to my son's heartbeat had been the most beautiful sound to me. I had felt such a serene peace at this point in time. The jealousy I had for so many years dissipated. I told myself how it would never rear its ugly head again. I could relax and enjoy the life that was growing inside of me. When I talked about my future child, there was indeed one on the way. This was still the early stages of my pregnancy, about 6 weeks or so. I waited until my next appointment, the week 10 ultrasound, before I finally told my family. I had been hoping to be at this point early enough for Christmas. I had wanted to do something big, like give everyone an envelope and tell them to open them at the same time. Inside would be a different phrase depending on who was receiving the letter, but it would be something to the effects of, "You're getting a new grandchild, cousin, niece, or nephew." Instead, I had texted them a picture of the ultrasound. I did not know how my family was going to react. I had stopped talking about my fertility treatment because my family never greeted it with excitement. Instead, whenever I brought up the subject, it was met with hesitance, warnings for me to think over about the timing, my career, how big of a decision this was. I was 33 years old with over a decade of experience working with children, most of the time infants. The lack of trust towards my autonomy was discouraging, so I stopped bringing up the subject until I was officially pregnant. And then, to my great delight and surprise, everyone was sublimely happy for me. My mother called, so excited that she shrieked. My brother phoned after her, referring to me as future mama. It was starting to feel real. My first trimester was not easy. Strong smells had a great impact on me. Some people say it's only certain smells that would set them off, but for me, it was anything that had a powerful odor. My anger rose. I was such a bitch first trimester, and I don't think that ever really went away, but it was like uncontrollable, like how angry I would get. The tiniest thing would set me off, and I had a bluntness to my manner which was new to me. I developed morning sickness right away, and it was severe. For breakfast, I could only handle a few bites of yogurt, and even that rarely stayed down. I had saltines throughout the day and not much else. My sickness would often come back in the evenings. I would be ravenous around 4:30, would eat essentially an entire meal, and then I would be too sick to handle dinner. My food aversions grew as well, and there were a few things that I felt safe enough to eat. Cereal and Doritos are what got me through it. That is all this one would let me eat was Fruity Pebbles, which I haven't eaten since like high school, and Doritos. That is what he would let me eat. Of all the things, those were the two my baby deemed safe. Sometimes bread and cheese were fine. Fruits were safe to a degree, but I always struggled with vegetables. I liked them well enough, but I preferred them cooked to raw. So they weren't a top option for snacks. I like egg rolls because then they're like deep fried. I don't care for like raw vegetables. That's just me. I would fill up on this high carb diet and then be too sick to do anything about it. A vicious cycle of my own making. I ended up going to the ER twice in 1 week. The, excuse me. The first time was for HG. I had started puking that morning and couldn't get myself to stop. I had been told that if I threw up more than 3 times in a day, I needed to go to the hospital, but I had vomited quite a bit more than that before I finally came out from work to go in. While there, just about everyone around me had either RSV or the flu A virus. Later that week, I became so sick that I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't keep anything down, not even liquids. Around 3 o'clock that afternoon, I feared being dehydrated and went back to the ER. This was when I had been diagnosed with both HG and the flu A virus, but I had been told that my baby was all right and that I just had to nurse myself back to health. Like, he's so tiny, and at this stage in pregnancy, your baby is just going to like feed off of any kind of nutrients that you have. So when you're sick in early pregnancy, it really is like you that you are taking care of because your baby's just going to take whatever it needs. There were a few more nights when I kept throwing up, but I would simply go to bed early and that seemed to fix things. I'd also been prescribed Unisum, which is an over the counter sleeping pill that apparently also doubles as an anti nausea pill. I had been taking those most nights anyway, and they did what I needed them to do. This was around the time I learned about the biological sex of my son. I wanted to know as soon as possible. I wanted to do a gender reveal cake, as cliche as that is, but I didn't know how to go about it. From television, I was under the impression that the doctors would be able to contact a bakery and let them know, but my OB informed me that they could not release medical information like that. The results had been sent to me via email. I had almost accidentally read them, but as soon as I came across the phrase fetus sex, I stopped. I ended up going to the bakery myself, scrolled down as far as I dared to, then asked the poor girls at the counter if they could continue to read through it until they saw the sex. This worked out, and I went home with a cake. I had only told a small handful of people, however. I wanted to know for myself, but I did not want gendered gifts. Like, I wanted to know, but I just, yeah. This was my way of avoiding getting either all pink or all blue clothes. I especially wanted to avoid onesies that had phrases on them, such as ladies' man. Some of my family members were disappointed that I was withholding this information, and I'm not sure if they understood my reasoning completely, but I held on to it regardless. My nickname growing up had been Pookie, so my family started to refer to my son as Pookie Jr. My friends knew my nickname as Train, so to them my son had been Baby Choo Choo, but to me he had always been Michael. At this point, I had started a new job as a high school art teacher. I had a storage room with my supplies, and this came with its own private bathroom. My first thought was how convenient this would be for puking, because that's what you think about when you're early pregnant. But I did not want people to think I was sick, and I wasn't ready for everyone to know I was pregnant yet. I was due in August, and it would be potentially tricky to tell my employers that I was going to need to be on leave around the same time the new school year would be starting. I did reach out to the district about it. I had been told to speak to one woman in particular who would help me with the paperwork. There were three items I needed to return to the district in my insurance. One was the doctor's note, an employer's note, and a note for myself. This had to be the single most frustrating aspect of my early pregnancy. There was a whole complicated process involved with my doctor's note. The district itself needed to fill out the employer's note, but they needed the doctor's note first. I tried to do my portion, but every time I sent it over, I would receive more paperwork. It felt like no one was actually reading my emails. I was consistently going through circles of trying to see what needed to be done. In the end, I never finished this process. Like, literally, never got that done. Never got my maternity leave approved because the paperwork was that horrendous. My second trimester became much easier than my first. I was finally able to eat a sufficient breakfast. Granted, I had stopped eating cereal decades ago because it never filled me up, but compared to months where my breakfast consisted of a few bites of yogurt, it was a feast. My cravings did not become any healthier, however. I still craved lots of carbs and chocolate. This was a food pregnant people are told to avoid, but I craved it desperately every day. A few weeks into my second trimester, I felt my first kick. I had been told that they feel like little butterflies at first, and that's exactly what I felt. Then I felt it again on the opposite side. My little baby was kicking and punching me. At as time went on and he grew, he would become this would become a regular habit. He would also start to press down on my intestines, which was always uncomfortable, but I relished in being able to feel him. I remember how painful that was. Like, I would just feel his little feet just press down, and I'd be like, oh my God, that hurts so much. Please stop. But also, it's like, okay, I guess he's fine. At the end of the day, I would want to sit on the couch and relax. That was when he would kick the most. I would place my hand on my stomach and just feel him dance in there. I saw my son a few more times during ultrasounds. There was a long one where they would be taking pictures for measurements. Michael did not enjoy this process. I could see him reacting on the screen. Every time the doctors pressed down, he would kick and punch. Eventually, he turned over completely in my womb and hit his face so she was unable to complete the exam. I had laughed at this and declared, "You are my son. This is exactly the personality I expected my child to have." Because you were like so you were so ornery that day, and I was like, that's exactly how I would expect the personality of my son to be. In hindsight, I'm so glad that I had gotten the chance to see this much of him. I saw my son one more time in another ultrasound. There was such a clear image of him on the screen. I could see everything: his nose, his fingers, his toes. I could even see that he had the hiccups and was taking a drink of my amniotic fluid. He moved his little foot and gave me a kick. I laughed. I couldn't help it, both from the sight of the fact that it tickled. I could see on the screen that this shook my womb. He must have thought it was funny too, because he did it again. I laughed once more. We went back and forth like that for a bit. It was the first and last time I played with my son. After that, my next appointment was a phone call. My OB had some initial concerns about the way the placenta was growing in, but she assured me that once they had collected the second set of pictures, everything looked normal. She was concerned about my weight. I had gained less than 10 pounds and I was nearly 6 months pregnant. Yet she said that my son was growing the way he was supposed to be. That's what they kept telling me, that everything was normal. My son was growing at a healthy rate. Right, and that less than 10 pounds was not intentional, okay? I swear I was eating, like, all day. Like, when my morning sickness finally subsided, it's like I would have, breakfast and then an early morning snack, a mid-morning snack, lunch, mid-afternoon snack, lunch, dinner, and then like, a midnight snack, so I wasn't waking up at 3 AM. So it wasn't that I wasn't eating, it's just that I'll talk about the reason later. But yeah, it's like I had gained less than 10. I think I gained like 5 to 7 pounds, and but she was like, "But well, yeah, I mean, you're healthy anyway." That's what I was told. Excuse me. Pregnant people are told that exercise is important. We have gym memberships. However, the equipment started to scare me. I didn't know what was safe and what was not safe, and Google gave me mixed results. I tried doing home routines off of YouTube, but these were so intense that they would make me sick. Eventually, I was able to get a maternity swimsuit and utilize the gym's pool. This was when I felt my strongest connection to my son. I acknowledged that we were both swimming around. In the waters, going back and forth in laps, I thought only of him, what life would be like when he was finally here. I have tried not to think about my child's potential personality. I didn't want to shape the nature of my child before they came. I did, however, fantasize about what we would do together. I thought of the mommy baby Halloween costumes we would wear. I thought about the type of Christmas pictures we would take. I went as far as to look up the different types of elementary schools he could go to. I have always been a planner, and so I set out to find a daycare for my son. As someone who had worked in many different childcare settings over the years, my heart was set on an in home one. I felt that these were cozier than centers. It did not feel like you were at school all day. It felt more like you were just hanging out at a friend's house. I went online and wrote down the emails and numbers of many different places I thought might be suitable. During my school spring break, I went out and toured these places. This was my first time going to daycares where I was the customer. I had to keep telling myself internally that these were not job interviews, as they had been my association with places like this. Still, I felt I knew the right questions to ask, and I think some of the owners were impressed with my knowledge. I had arranged tours with 6 different places and ended up on the waiting list for 4. I wanted to research for a little more, as wait lists can be a tricky thing, but felt this was good progress for 1 week. I do recall how some of these owners were a little surprised to discover that I was only about 5 months pregnant. Apparently, it's more normal to look for a child care after the baby is born, but I felt there was no harm in getting a head start. Why wait until I was on maternity leave when I could have this settled sooner and not have to worry about it? Why wait until my son was born? The same week, we had his baby shower. The plan was to have three altogether, one in California, then two back at home for the maternal and paternal sides of my family. I had invited people from different avenues of my life, friends I had made through other friends from work, from book clubs. I had even invited my former nanny clients. They watched me take care of their children for years. It was excited for them to see me finally welcome mine. It was a small event, but a happy one that went about as well as it could have. I ordered catering from a local restaurant for lunch. We had a few small games planned. I remember being nervous about there being more than one winner because I hadn't gotten enough prizes for that, but fortunately it didn't happen. Then the gifts were open. I had felt so loved in that moment. Everyone brought us multiple presents: bathtubs, high chairs, baby monitors, books, blocks, clothes, blankets. It was more than I ever expected to get. I thanked everyone. They helped me clean up, and we all went home. At the time, we were living in a two-bedroom apartment, so a lot of the baby stuff had to be placed in a friend's garage for the temporary reasons. We had planned on moving into a house before my son came. Everything was going so smoothly. Then 2 weeks later, my son was gone. Okay. So, uh, chapter 3 is the death. So, here we go. Okay. I was 25 weeks pregnant when it happened. That week had felt off. I was extremely tired, but I wrote it off as being due to external factors. I was facing stress at work, and being a teacher, we were right around the corner from summer break. That was around the time when everyone began to check out, staff included. I had also been incredibly thirsty. I carry a Contigo water bottle everywhere I go, and I had gone from one bottle a day to two refills to now three. So this was the water bottle. I was drinking three of these a day. I started to get nervous. Yes, it was hot because, it's like almost summertime, but I was drinking significantly more water than normal. All Google told me was that it could be due to gestational diabetes. This was on a Monday, and I was scheduled to go in for a test for GD that Friday. I was worried, but I didn't think there would be anything my doctors would do with my appointment being that soon. Like, I basically thought, doctor's gonna be, oh, you're worried on Monday, but you're coming in on Friday, so just come in then. Like, that's what I thought would happen. Then there was the cramp. I sat down for my third period class and found that getting up felt difficult. I could feel a strong pain in my abdomen. This lasted around 20 minutes. I looked up to see if this was normal, but I had searched for information about the third trimester. I did not realize that I was still considered second since I was over 6 months. I thought it was like first trimester because it's 9 months. So I thought they were split up by 3 months. It's like first 3 months for that's the first trimester, then 6 to whatever, like that's the second, and then, like, 9 months. But so I'm over 6 months, so I'm thinking, oh, I'm in the third trimester, but no, apparently you're still considered the second trimester. My research said that yes, you start to cramp in the third trimester as your body gets ready for labor. And I will forever wonder if that cramp was the start of the placenta abruption. I still felt Michael kick me that night. It happened that Thursday. I knew immediately something was wrong. I had woken up from a terrible nightmare. It had nothing to do with the situation. My nightmare was about our cats eating my pet birds, but I've always been a lucid dreamer, so it had felt so real. I woke up afraid. Something in my body felt strange. I don't know how to explain it. I just did not feel as I did at other points in my pregnancy. I need to sit this way for a minute, my back. Okay. Years and years ago, I used to watch these videos on YouTube where this woman was documenting her pregnancy. Then one day she uploaded a video where she explained that she didn't know what happened, but she could no longer feel her baby and her son was gone. Those words played in my mind over and over again. Like, just that was just immediate. I woke up and just As soon as I felt weird, I immediately thought of those videos, and that was from, like, my college days, and I'm in my 30s, so I put my hand on my belly. I felt Michael punch me, but not his usual big kicks. This wasn't too out of the ordinary, however. He normally started kicking more in the afternoon to evening. I felt comforted enough feeling his punch, so I got up and started my daily routine. This is off subject yet relevant. About a month prior to this, my cat had a vet emergency, and I ended up calling off of work to tend to her. Apparently, I did not do the procedure for calling a sub correctly because the next day the secretary was in my face berating me for my absence. I think that if it hadn't been for this, I would have gone to the doctor that morning. I told myself that Michael was punching me and that I did not want to get into further trouble with the school. I wish I could go back in time and have gone to that Monday when I first felt the cramp. The day went by as typical as it could have, but as the hours rolled, I really began to notice that Michael was not kicking me. I started to lie back when my students weren't present to help encourage him to move. It had been open house that night, something teachers were required in their contracts to attend. We had been provided dinner, and when I could still not feel Michael, I knew something was wrong. I headed down to the nearest urgent care. They told me that they did not have the proper equipment to help me and that I needed to go to the emergency room. I was hesitant because when I had gone prior for my HG, the whole thing had taken 4 hours. I just wanted them to check Michael's heartbeat. They assured me that as a pregnant person, I would be a high priority. That did not happen. Disappointed, I headed over. The whole time I was driving, I begged Michael to give me a kick, that if he gave me one big kick, then we could go home and not have to do this. We arrived, and I told them what was wrong. I remember that the secretary gave me a very strange look, as if she had no hope for me right then. My vitals were checked almost right away, but then I sat there waiting for a doctor for nearly an hour. I went up to ask the nurse if she knew how much longer, and even her response to me was, "You're still out here?" I'm getting sick just remembering this. Finally, I was called back. They did an ultrasound right away, and I saw my son. His heart was moving much slower, and this was confirmed by the doctor. He told me that there was not much hope at this point, saying that there was too much stress on the baby. I panicked, wondering if I was hurting Michael. The doctor said that's not what he meant, and then he left the room, and I was forced to wait for a second ultrasound. Oh my God. I might need a break after this chapter. So they wheeled me down to the basement where they had the equipment. I kept trying to ask the nurses around me what was happening, but none of them gave me answers. And that also happened with my miscarriage back in December. It's just like, what's happening? What's happening? The nurses, I don't know. I just take pictures. It's like, God damn, you're fucking useless. Even when they finally laid me down to do so and I watched the process happen, they gave me no answers. The nurse performing this told me she simply took the pictures. The image of my son looked completely different, however. Before, it was so clear that I could see his fingers and toes. Now I could not tell where his head was. They brought me to another room and told me they were going to transfer me to another hospital where they had the equipment for labor and delivery. I thought this might be good news. Why would they send me to another place with better equipment if there was nothing to be done? Again, I kept asking anyone around me what was going on. I still got no answers. One of the nurses at least had sympathy for me, being a mother herself, but she knew nothing about the situation. They strapped me down and gave me an IV. I asked for a bag and then proceeded to vomit the entire contents of my stomach. They told me that this was a bad sign, but I was under so much stress. Who wouldn't be in this situation? Then the doctor came back in and he told me they were calling this a demise. And I wailed, "No, no, no." I begged that there must be something that could be done. He said that we would have to wait and see the other hospital. He made it sound like my son was still alive and that he was going to die. He did not tell me that Michael was already dead. I tried to call my best friend, but the signal wasn't working, so I texted her that things were heading for the worst. She asked if she needed to come out, and I sent her the address. Then they moved me into the ambulance, and I was able to call my parents. It was late, even later for them, due to a time difference, but I knew they had to hear this, and I needed them. They prayed for me and my son on the drive over, which took about 20 minutes. We begged that everything would be all right, that some miracle would happen to save his life. Then we got to the other hospital. My best friend arrived shortly after I did. They laid me down for another ultrasound, and that was when they told me there was no heartbeat. I was in shock. My body went completely numb. I felt nothing, which is something my brain has done to me at funerals. When something so traumatic happens, my brain won't accept it and I simply feel nothing, which is what is happening right now. So, again, that's why it's like if it seems weird that I'm like smiling while talking about this, it's because my brain is completely shutting off. And even though I am reading these words, it is like we are not processing this. This has happened to someone else and we are not processing this because that's just how my brain has always reacted to trauma. I asked so many questions. How did this happen? Were they sure? Could something have been done to prevent this? Again, I still received no real answers. They said that they had two ultrasounds with no heartbeat, and that was the time, and that it was time to conclude that my baby had died. And that was when I realized Michael had passed away back at the emergency room. That first ultrasound was the last time I saw him alive. I asked what were next steps. They wanted to perform tests on me, but I refused. It was late. I was traumatized, exhausted, and I couldn't deal with needles and speculums. It was still Thursday, and they told me I would need to come back on Tuesday to induce Michael out of me. I asked if there was any way to do it sooner. I couldn't imagine carrying my dead son for days, but they told me no, I would have to talk to my usual doctor. They had two options for me. I could go into labor and Michael would be fully extracted. He would be intact. Um, they said I would be able to hold him. At the time, the idea sounded devastating to me. The thought of holding my dead baby sounded like a concept which would absolutely break me. Then they told me that they could simply extract Michael while I was sedated. It would be difficult to do a proper autopsy this way, but the idea was more appealing to me. I still wasn't ready to accept this as a reality, and being put under sedation sounded like an escape. When they went to discharge me, they asked if I had thoughts of suicide. I told them that it was a very complicated question right now given the circumstances. I didn't think I would actually do it, but to be completely honest, the thought was going to cross my mind. They had asked if I had these mind thoughts in the past. I snapped back, no, of course not. I couldn't do that to my baby. They felt better about letting me go after that. I called my parents back. I told them my baby was dead. This was the first time I told them that his name is Michael. They both broke down. My mom told me that she would fly out to be there with me. I asked for how long, and she said as long as I needed, so I asked her to stay a week. My next instinct was to tell everyone I knew immediately. I don't know how that detail is going to come across, but in the heat of the moment, I did not want to risk receiving a text from like an unknowing person asking me how my baby was doing. It's like I didn't want to be there in the moment. Like in the moment, this is so traumatic. You just want to be out of your own body. And so it's like my brain just goes, well, what do we need to do right now so I can focus on that instead of what's actually happening to me? So I was like, I just want to text as many people as possible. I don't care if they don't text me back right now because it's like, 11 p.m., but I need to tell everyone right now so I don't risk like 2 weeks from now waking up to a text being like, hey, how's the baby? And then, like, having PTSD from that. My best friend helped me by messaging our group chats. Then she asked our roommates who were still at home to hide all the baby shower gifts. I could not look at them right now. I asked for a work note and then we drove home because, I didn't want that bitchy secretary to come and yell at me at all. I mean, I wasn't going back, but it's like I'm about to be gone for 6 weeks on medical leave. So I was like, give me that work note now because I do not want work bothering me at all during this. I spent the next day in bed. I clutched my stomach, simultaneously wanting my child out of me and never letting him go. I feared my body healing after he was gone, as if he had never been there. I tried to watch videos of other people who had been through stillborns. The hospital had given me papers for grief counseling, and they insisted that hearing stories of others who had been through this would bring me solace in not being alone. It really was no comfort. Every medical expert that said stillburns were rare made me feel like a statistic. There was no consolation in hearing other parents be excited to welcome a new child into their lives just to have their bodies betray them. Only two things brought me comfort. One was the idea that it was still possible to have healthy babies after this. Two, that a lot of people tried again right away. The second one made me feel more normal about my thoughts. It wasn't about replacing Michael. No one could ever replace Michael. And if it were possible, I would have given anything to have him back. I would have walked down to Hades and begged for his soul and then break my neck rather than turn around. I would have traded anything for him, paid any price. But the only real thing I could do was heal and keep moving forward. The people around me feel made me feel very loved. Friends and family were checking in on me, making sure I was getting through the day. I loved them truly. But in the 25 weeks I had Michael, he had become even more precious to me than anyone else I had ever known. Being alive while he wasn't felt selfish. I still feel selfish about it. The thought of staying alive for the sake of my friends and family wasn't enough motivation. I would rather have Michael. And the only person I could ever love as much as Michael would be a potential sibling. So the thought of a future child was the only thing that kept me from doing something irreversible. The thought of all those baby shower gifts now sitting somewhere collecting dust broke my heart. I did not know how I would get through the rest of the year. I had expected to finally spend the holidays with my son, the child I had been waiting over a decade to have. The pain was insurmountable. Again, I did not think that I had the energy or the means to do anything to hurt myself, but I had been taking Unisum sleeping pills for months now. Sorry, I can't read. My eyes are getting blurry. Mm, okay. And the bottle was still at my table side. I spent most of the days napping, so when night came, I laid awake for hours. I finally decided to take a pill to help me out, but I stared at that bottle for a very long time. Finally, I got up and gave them to my roommate. I told her to hide them. And then, for the record, like over the counter stuff, if you overdose, it just kind of makes you like sick. It's the prescribed stuff that if you overdose on, it's fatal. Did not find that out till later, but still, I gave her the bottle. I called a childhood best friend of mine. She was both a mom and a nurse. I told her everything, including how I planned to have Michael extracted while I was under sedation. She told me that this was my decision, but she felt that from one mom to another, I would end up regretting it. I would regret never holding my son, never seeing his face. Yes, it would be hard, and I could change my mind, but she felt that I would find more closure in getting to see him at least once. This friend had also given me a 24/7 hotline for moms like me. I called them when no one else was available, and this helped with my anxiety. I didn't have the energy to get out of bed, but at times I would become so manic that it would frighten me. Like I would just all of a sudden get this urge to just run, like just lying there wasn't enough. I needed to just run for miles and miles, and it would scare me getting that way. It's hard to explain. It was a Friday, and my mother wouldn't be in until Saturday. That was the only short term comfort I had, but waiting for her was agony. Then my doctor called. She gave me her condolences and said that they would set up my induction the following day. I told her to schedule it later in the evening in order to give my mom time to get there. When she asked if I wanted to go through labor or extraction, I thought about the words my friend had said and I told her labor. I decided I did want to hold Michael. All right, so it feels a little weird to have a chapter entitled The Birth After the Death, but yeah, he died inside of me and then he had to be extracted. And I don't mind sharing, obviously, because I'm reading this. I don't mind sharing my pregnancy story or my labor story with people who are familiar that my son is dead. Because like, talking about the pregnancy, that was when he was alive. That was the happiest time of my life. And then, there are some things about his birth, which are easy to talk about. You'll see what I mean in a few minutes. I am going to take a little break. I know nothing about live streaming, so you're just going to stare at Michael Bear and the closet for a minute. I just need to use the bathroom. It's about an hour 15 in, and we're halfway through the book. So yeah, this will probably clock out at about 2.5 hours, 3 hours. So all right, be just a moment. Alrighty, that's all. Okay. I don't think I mentioned this at the beginning. This is what I wore at his funeral. So I wanted it to be seen as like a celebration of life. So I told everyone to wear really bright colors, and this is what I ended up wearing. I do not talk about the funeral in this book because, like I said, I wanted the book to be at the funeral. So, but basically, it was at a Unitarian church, which is like the only church I feel comfortable going into because they tend to be a bit more liberal than other churches. So, they're a bit more accepting of people like me. So, and yeah, family obviously came out, some friends came over. You know, Speeches were made, songs were played. It was a very short event, but, one that was necessary to happen. So, anyway, okay. Chapter 4, The Birth. My mother came in the following afternoon. While she was on the plane, my roommates were at work, and I had to call the hotline again to deal with my anxiety. When she texted that she had landed, I called her as soon as she got in an Uber. I asked her to stay on the phone with me until she reached my apartment. I didn't want to be left alone, even for just 20 minutes. When she arrived, we burst into tears as we embraced. I knew I looked a mess. I was borrowing a shirt from my friend because I couldn't bear to put on my maternity clothes again, and I wore no pants. I hadn't brushed my hair in 2 days. Even if I did, it wouldn't matter since I spent the morning in bed. My mother had seen me pregnant prior to this, but this was the start of my second trimester. So my son, oh, sorry. She had seen me pregnant before, but it was at the start of my second trimester. So my son had been tiny, and I rubbed at my belly now, very visibly pregnant, and asked if she wanted to feel him. And she pressed her head to him and she cried, "My baby." So we waited a few hours before heading over to the hospital. Labor and delivery was behind a locked door, and we had to tell the security guard what was going on to get inside. I remember becoming very angry with him because we were trying to skirt around the issue without saying it outright, but he was not picking up on the clues. We told him that we were here for a surgery, which confused him, and I finally had to be blunt and say, "I'm having my baby removed. My baby is dead inside me." He looked appalled, and I hoped it was due to his own ignorance. This would be the start of my bitterness, but more on that in the next chapter. And I have been very, very bitter. I get tired of being a learning experience. I get tired of people realizing they shouldn't say or ask certain things because they do that to me and I have to give them the answer that I give and they're like, "Oh, I shouldn't have said that." It's like I get so tired of being that learning experience. Okay. They let us in and took me to a room where I was strapped down by IVs and epidural. Please just get the hot take, but just get the epidural, okay? My knee injury was more painful than my labor because of the it's like 12 seconds of pure pain because it is a long needle that they stick in your back. But then I slept through my contractions. Okay, anyway. They gave me medicine which would start my contractions, but I was too numb to feel them. They also said that I would need to stay on a diet of clear liquids. This did not bother me because I had no appetite anyway. I had spent the last few days living off of popsicles to stay hydrated. My mother asked if they could do another ultrasound. She wanted to be sure they weren't wrong. It was a level of denial we were both in. The doctor said that this was a normal question for people in our circumstances and that they could take as many ultrasounds as we liked. But I knew what waited ahead, and sure enough, once again, they told us that there was no heartbeat. We started this journey on Saturday. I spent most of Sunday asleep. That was the only comfort I had. In sleep, I was in my own little bubble without any pain. Surprisingly, my dreams weren't nightmares, and even when I first woke up, I would feel a little lighter, as though I would accept that things would not always be this painful and that I would get through the grief. Then something would happen to make reality set back in, like a little trigger, like eating or drinking water, and I would be in my own body again, the last place I wanted to be, and the sadness would hit me all at once. It's like wake up from dreaming, it's like very temporary high, like, oh, I'm gonna get through this. And then I'd get out of bed and it's just like bam, right back. Like the reality would just slap me in the face. My mom and friend took turns visiting me. I couldn't leave the bed because of the epidural. There was a TV in the room, and the nurses offered to let me turn it on, but I couldn't. I did not want to associate any show or movie with what was happening. I'd rather just sleep. I do want to take a moment to acknowledge how wonderful all my doctors and nurses were. Like in this day, they were good. Okay, every other day, and they were the exact opposite with my miscarriage. They were so dismissive, but in this like pocket of time, I had good doctors. So everyone had been very sympathetic of the situation we were dealing with. There was a board where they wrote down the names of my mother and friends since there would be shift changes and they wanted to know who to expect. But there was also written down Michael's name on that board. They had said that when my son was born, they would put a cooling cot in his bassinet so he would remain preserved. I could hold him as long as I wanted, and that most people do just that until they are discharged. They offered to wrap him up in a blanket, and they said that the hospital took pictures and footprints. I would get a little box of memorabilia. Things which I had feared not being strong enough to handle only a day ago now became a source of comfort. Around 6 p.m., they gave me the last dose of contraction medicine. They also put a balloon inside of me. The doctors in charge said that it would be another 12 to 24 hours before I dilated enough for them to do anything, but to call as soon as I felt pressure. I remember at one point feeling an extreme sense of anxiety. I know that this must sound strange given my situation, but this was different. I had the sudden urge to get up from the bed and run. Like, this is what I meant, that manic feeling where it's like I need to run for miles. Like, it would just pop up. I couldn't last a moment longer. I was even tempted to change my mind and have my son extracted instead so I could end this. But I told myself that I had come this far, I wanted to see it through. It still took quite a while before I calmed back down. I wondered if the shift in emotions was a prerequisite for what was about to happen. Around 10 p.m., just 4 hours after they had given me the final dose, I felt the balloon inside me move. I rang, telling them I felt pressure. A nurse came, but he told me that he did not see a significant change. I said that I felt the balloon move. He came back with a doctor, and while they spoke, the balloon completely fell out of me. The next thing I knew, I was being told to push. I won't lie, I had great fears about childbirth. I think most of us do who are capable and willing of going through it. I think we all have our anxieties about childbirth. There are many horror stories. Even if everything goes well, there's always the threat of the pain. However, because my son had been so tiny, only a pound and 3 ounces, everything happened quickly. I had been strapped to this bed for nearly 2 days, and the labor itself lasted about 5 minutes. I wasn't the first one to see him. I was still not quite emotionally ready, but my mother had watched everything. She started to cry as she whispered, "That's Michael." They asked if I wanted to cut the umbilical cord, but I said no. It was late, I was tired, and my hands were shaking like crazy. And apparently that's normal after giving birth. Like I was just like, it looked like I was hyperventilating, but everyone, including my mother, said, "Yeah, that happens after birth." And I'm like, okay. So they took my son over to the bassinet, cleaned and wrapped him, and finally handed him to me. I thought that the worst moment of my life would have been to see my dead son. Instead, I was washed over with a strong sense of peace. I could at last see my baby. I could see his face. I could hold him in my arms. I could smell him. I knew he wasn't alive, but it did not feel as though he was gone. It felt like he had arrived. His presence was all around me. Some part of me heard him crying out, "I'm here, Mommy, I'm here." I knew my son wasn't going to look like a healthy baby. I had to brace myself for that part. And sure enough, they handed me a purple infant with an unfinished skull. It might sound like a bit cliche to admit this part, as every loving parent thinks their child is perfect, but I fell in love immediately. I saw everything right about Michael. His tiny ears were so cute. He had my nose and lips. This was my baby. All the years of waiting, wondering what my child would look like, and here he was with me at last. As I've said, I used to talk to my body. I used to ask my eggs which one was going to be the baby I had been dreaming about. And I knew that this baby was still Michael. I don't regret a single decision that led to this. I don't regret becoming pregnant. While I wish my son had lived, I would rather have had this short time with him than for him to have never existed at all. And he would always be my firstborn, my son, my baby of my dreams. And I should probably mention, and if this was a novel, I would have gotten notes back from my editor saying that this lacks subtlety, but such is the irony of reality that this Sunday was also Mother's Day. I found it rather humorous how confident the doctors had been that I would not be delivering until late the following Monday, yet here I was. He was in a hurry to get out into the world, just like I had been during my own birth. I like to believe that he wanted to be with me then to make me a mommy on Mother's Day. Like I said, I have a handful of magical thinking. I acknowledge it's magical thinking, but it's just like, that's my son. They placed him in the cot next to my bed. I struggled to hold him at first because of the fatigue and the shaking. I kept handing him to my mom, letting her have grandma bonding time. She kept calling him a miracle and told him he was so delicate. I could tell she was just as in love with him as I was. She was the only member of my family to ever meet Michael, and that's a connection we will always share. That night, I tried to sleep. I looked towards Michael. I had been in the same position in that bed for nearly 2 days. My back had become cramped, and I needed to sleep on my side. There was a time when I was lying so I could still face him, but this position soon became uncomfortable. Painfully so, as my back began to spasm. I was torn between wanting to turn over and wanting to look at my son. Fortunately, the nurses needed to come help me whenever I needed the bathroom. I was still coming off the epidural, and my legs were too numb for me to walk on my own. Whenever they came to help me, I would ask them to move Michael to the other side of the bed, which they did. They took him away from the room when they were ready to take his pictures. They asked what colors I would want if colors were an option. I told them yellow, and anyone who knows me is aware that this has always been my favorite color. I fell asleep, and when he came back, Michael had a little crocheted yellow hat on his head. My son was very tiny and soft, which became a factor as we held on to him. His lips began to part. At first, his little tongue was sticking out. Then, after the pictures, his mouth had opened completely. He looked as if he was yawning. When we held him again, his lips closed back together and were pursed, so now he was pouting. My son was expressive even in death. He had such a vibrant personality. The next morning, nurses took him out one more time. They needed to collect samples for the autopsy. At this point, I was able to get around the room on my own, so I took a shower. By the time I was done, they had brought him back. Hey, baby boy, I missed you, I told him as I crawled into bed. My words began to sink in. As I said, I was comforted in my dreams. Sleep became an oasis until reality set back in. This hospital room had also turned into a secure little bubble. I could have lived in there if it meant holding my son forever. But his nose kept bleeding, and they needed to change the padding between his blankets. There were times where I wanted to hold him, yet put him back in the cooling cot, and I knew this could not last indefinitely. We took many of our own pictures. My mother recorded one video of us. I sang Michael a lullaby, nearly bursting into tears as I did so. Eventually, the nurses brought in the memorabilia box they had made for him. Inside were the pictures they took, as well as his footprints. I knew that going home, I would be placing in a few items of my own: the positive pregnancy test, the vial which had held the donor sperm, and the ultrasound pictures taken. They also let us keep everything he had touched. They packed away the little yellow hat and his blankets into a sealed bag to preserve his essence. They gave us a fresh blanket, saying that we could wash this and hold on to it whenever we wanted. The nurse who wrapped up the blankets had been my favorite. She let me know that she had also been through the same kind of loss. She had also been the first to tell me how much Michael looked like me. No one is questioning that he came out of you, but that is definitely your baby, she had said. I was glowing in the recognition. A social worker also came in to talk with me. I had admitted that what I had almost done with the sleeping pills, and they wanted to make sure that it was safe for me to go home. The social worker asked a lot of questions about my grief, my coping mechanisms, my faith. I didn't have answers for everything, but my support system was solid. I would not have gotten through any of this without the people around me showing the level of kindness and compassion that they did. Around noon, the doctors and I talked about discharge. I didn't want to be parted from Michael. I knew that this would be the only time I had with him. However, the condition of his body was only getting worse. I showed no signs of infection or hemorrhage, the common concerns with postpartum, so there was really no need for me to stay beyond wanting more time with my son. My mother held him a few more times as well. The doctors gave us notice of when they would be back, so I let my mother have Michael while I went to the bathroom. That was the last time she held him. After she handed him back to me, she asked if there was anything I wanted to say to him right now, and all I could think of was "see you soon." I'm not entirely sure why that was the phrase to come to mind. I think in the moment I just needed to think about our souls being reunited. My mother and I talked about how both of my grandfathers could watch over him. The image brought a small sense of peace over me as I imagined the two men meeting my son and caring for him until I was able to. I gave him one last kiss. A part of me died when they finally took Michael from my arms. I can still feel the weight of him being lifted. The worst moment had been when they told me he no longer had a heartbeat. This was the second worst. The third would come later. As they took his blankets and hat to be wrapped up, I saw my little son on the table naked for the first time. I was still amazed by what my body had created and that this baby had come from me. I was amazed at just how much of him had developed. I then came the sense of betrayal, that if my body had done its job taking care of my son, in just 3 more months he would have been born alive and screaming. A moment I had pictured in my mind over and over again, a moment I would never have with him. When they wheeled his tiny body out of the room, I could only manage to whisper, "Bye bye." Okay, so if I recall correctly, chapter 5 is the aftermath, so like the immediate stuff. I believe this is the longest chapter. Yeah, yeah, I had no idea when to end this one. This was the one mm, I just kept writing and writing and writing until it was like I was writing what I was doing like day of, I just did not know when to end this chapter because this is all the aftermath. I'm still in the aftermath. That's why I'm doing this. This is all the aftermath. Okay, so On the way home from the hospital, I played a song in the car, one that was very dear to me. It was Beautiful Boy by Celine Dion. The song comes from her Miracle album, a CD we used to play every day at nap time back at my daycare from 2015, the one with my favorite class. So I'm unsure as to why the song stuck out to me so much a decade ago, but it did. I had played the album frequently when I was trying to conceive as some type of good luck charm, especially when I discovered I was pregnant with a boy. Now it's just Michael's song. I bled significantly in the early days, as to be expected postpartum, but not as much as I suspect other people go through. I found a sort of comfort in this bleeding. It was a reminder of what my body had endured for Michael's sake, a reminder that he was here. I was still experiencing body dysphoria. I did not want to exist within my own skin. I could not handle pressing against my stomach and feeling its softness. No matter what people told me, I felt betrayed by my body. The bleeding made things easier, as for me, it was a connection back to Michael. My milk ended up coming in. It was painful and happened in the middle of the night, which made it very difficult to sleep. I ended up going to bed with a bra and a tea towel, plus an ice pack. The next morning, I tried to hand express my milk out, and I found doing this to be impossible, so I had to get one of my roommates to drive me to Walgreens. He asked if he could take my car, but since my mother was staying at an Airbnb during her visit, I lent it to her. He said to give him a few minutes to clean out his car. I didn't think much about it at first, as he was still new to having moved in with us. At some point, however, he finally admitted that there would be a few baby gifts visible, and I understood where he had hidden my shower presents the night Michael died. His compassion for this situation moved me greatly. At Walgreens, I picked up a pump. I felt it was strange that the hospital did not provide me with one. Perhaps it was because I only needed to pump enough to alleviate the pain. They had recommended Sudafed to prevent my body from making more milk. The hand pump was time consuming, but it did significantly more than I could on my own. The following day, my mother and I were at a funeral home to arrange what would be done with Michael's remains. The hospital had given us a list of places they worked with, and we went with one that friends had recommended to us. I knew I wanted him cremated so I would be able to take him home. It never crossed my mind to bury him. I wanted my son with me wherever I lived. The nurse we spoke with was just as compassionate. I'm sorry, not the nurse. The woman we spoke with was just as compassionate as the nurses and the doctors who had been taking care of me. While explaining the process, she kept calling him Michael, which I appreciated. She said that they would pick up Michael from the hospital post autopsy and that they would take care of Michael once he was here. I had to fill out the paperwork, including his death certificate. He had never had a birth certificate. The form asked for my relationship to the deceased, and I filled out mother. The title I had envied for so many years, mine at last, but in the cruelest of ways, and that had been the third worst moment. Okay. The funeral home had a catalog of little urns for infants. However, their list was very short, and I did not care for most of them. There were a lot of pink and blue, which was something I had been avoiding my entire pregnancy. It didn't matter though, because the very first option was the one I knew I had to have. It was a little wooden heart with footprints carved into it, with the phrase, "If love could have saved you, you would have lived forever." And it was perfect. Then I noticed that the catalog had it labeled as a keepsake. I became worried that it was merely a decoration. My mother said that we would order an urn online if we didn't like any of their options, and the idea sounded horrendous to me. I did not want to keep looking for this, to continue bringing it into the forefront of my mind, let alone wait for it to appear in the mail. It was difficult enough to be here, planning on what to do with my son's remains, something I never thought I would have to endure. The woman helping us had stepped out of the room because I had begun crying and she wanted to give us space. When she came back in, we asked her what exactly the wooden heart was meant to be, and she informed us that it was indeed an urn. My heart lifted briefly in that moment, so relieved that this part would be done sooner rather than later. She told us that she would be contacting the hospital to check in on Michael and let us know when they had him. 2 weeks was the time she said it would take to cremate him. We paid and left. The school I worked for, however, was not as compassionate as other professionals I had seen during this time. And this is where I diss my employers for a minute, and I don't really care. I have circumstances which I'm allowed to not care. That's all I'm going to say. The day I was discharged, I received a call from my principal asking me about paperwork I needed to fill out for my leave of absence. I could not even dignify her with a return call. I instead texted her stating bluntly that my son had died and I had spent the last 2 days and a half in the hospital, and then sent her a copy of my work note. I had half anticipated this action on their part, which is why I had been so insistent about the note that the night Michael had left. It still boiled my blood that the same day I had to say goodbye to my son was the same day I had to deal with my tactless boss. Likewise, the same day we picked out the urn, our school secretary, the one who bitched at me, texted me asking if I had any lesson plans for the students. I was beyond furious if they thought I would be even remotely ready to take on any work responsibilities when the death of my son and my body going into labor happened in a matter of days. I responded as civil as I could manage, but made it clear that I did not want to be disturbed. They never reached out again. However, I cared about my students. They had been in the middle of a ceramics project. The school did not have a kiln of their own, so I was renting one at a nearby location. These had finished and needed to be picked up. While I did not feel guilty for missing out the end of the year with them, it still pained me that this tragedy was large enough to impact them as well. So I went back and collected the pieces and returned them to my school. I had another reason for doing this, so I would sometimes join the students in the projects they were making. It was mostly to bide my time, but also served as a way for me to show them visually what I wanted them to accomplish. I ended up sculpting a little pinch pot of Michael's face. At the time, all I had to go off of were his ultrasound pictures, yet these were very clear with his features and silhouettes. When he was born, it struck me how much my pottery looked like him. I wanted to make sure I went back and retrieved it. My mother stayed with me the rest of the week. My roommates and I were in the process of moving, which became my greatest distraction from the grief. There were a few setbacks, however. The first was finding the mail when we came back home. There were two letters addressed to me, one from my parents and one from my sister and her husband. Are these the Mother's Day cards? I asked because I had been expecting them. Again, like this all happened Mother's Day weekend, and I was aware that my family was going to send me Mother's Day cards because we all thought my son was going to be born in August. So my mother confirmed, and she told me not to open them. She said to throw them away, but I refused. I wanted to believe in a time when these would not be painful to look at. The second setback had been during the packing process. I came across a few thank you cards from the baby shower I had not yet mailed because I had anticipated seeing my friends in the near future. I recalled the words I had written where I thanked them all for coming and helping to welcome my son into the world. All of this was less than a month ago. It felt far from real. I asked my mother what to do with them because it didn't seem right to send them now. She said to hold on to those as a sort of keepsake, and we packed them up. The next few days were spent packing, and I again began to feel as though I existed within a tiny bubble. The simple routines of the days, having my mother help take care of me to shield me from reality's clutches. Even though I cried constantly, I found ways to get through the day. But when my mother eventually had to go back home, the waves crashed down once more. I had a little scare during her last night in town. I had yet to sleep with the clean blanket the hospital gave us and felt that now was the perfect time to do so. Michael's belongings were in two bags. One was what I thought had contained the clean blanket, and the other held the blankets he had been wrapped in. I opened up both, ready to hold one and smell the other. I was disappointed when I realized that his scent had already faded, but became quite worrisome when I realized that I could not find his little yellow hat. I looked in both bags and his memorabilia box. My brain went almost blank, telling me that it had to be here because to think otherwise would have sent me into a panic attack. I was tempted to call my mother and ask if she possibly knew, but she would have been asleep at that point. I was even tempted to call the hospital. Dejected, I crawled into bed and held up the blanket. Out of its folding fell a plastic bag. Inside was the little yellow head. Oh, thank God, I whispered over and over again as I brought it close to me. There was only one silver lining keeping me going at this time. My roommates had planned to go on vacation during Memorial Day weekend, plans which had been made long before Michael. I couldn't bear the idea of being alone in the apartment for days on end, so it was arranged for me to go back home during this time. My other biggest distraction had been movies, particularly romantic comedies and animated films. When movies were safe and fun, I would feel almost the same comfort as I did with sleep. There was a sort of numbness coming over me for a period of time. That was when I noticed changes within me. Somehow, all of my favorite movies seemed to have babies in them. The Prince of Egypt had been a longtime favorite of mine, but it opens up with the genocide of infant boys. Tarzan also opened up with two infants, one losing his life. I still have not watched Tarzan. I managed to finally watch Prince of Egypt this past Easter, but I still have not watched Tarzan. I don't think I could handle that opening with Kala. Hercules begins with a baby and a happy enough start, but this was equally painful. The characters were celebrating the birth of a new baby, something I should have been able to do. Then, just like me, his parents lost the chance to raise him. I felt that something would break in me if I saw Hera cry over her son's kidnapping. Wicked, another longtime favorite of mine, now turned film, had also a small scene with a baby. One short enough to fast forward, but it put me on edge. I did not want to risk seeing a man ready to be rid of a perfectly healthy baby simply because she had a skin condition. Even Matilda, which is all about perseverance, now gave me stress. I could not handle a movie where these parents did not love their child. I'm aware that this is reality for lots of children. Yet to experience this in reverse, to see people who had what I wanted and be willing to throw it away was far too painful to endure. I picked movies I thought would be safe. The Little Mermaid seemed like a good choice as there were no babies in it. However, I had forgotten about the joke made towards the second act after Ariel saved Eric and Scuttle goes to find a pulse in his foot. This was a joke which had made me laugh throughout childhood, but in the moment I couldn't listen to him talk about not being able to find a heartbeat. Ultimately, I found solace in Lilo and Stitch. Its messaging about grief and rebuilding a family hit close to home. However, since it was about losing parents and not children, it did not hit so closely that it became a trigger. It might be a bit strange to feel so strongly about these films, but I'm high empathy, and movies have always left a profound impact on me. I mean, if you're here, you know how much media means to me. I write stories, I animate stories, so it's like, yeah, film has an impact on me. These films had been a comfort to me from time and time again, and now they filled me with anxiety and fear. Not having such a small sense of security left me feeling raw. Somehow, every song with lyrics reminded me of Michael. There were some, such as Beautiful Boy, which I had already associated with him, but there were other songs, ones about grief and heartache, that had lyrics suddenly cut me deep. The song It's Quiet Uptown from Hamilton was all about the loss of a child. It described the pain as unimaginable, which I think I say this later, but don't ever describe this grief as unimaginable to the person. I get no one wants to imagine this happening, but when it's actually happening, you fuck your imagination. It's happening. So just don't, I would recommend not using that word. That word almost felt like an insult when you're in the middle of it. Listening to music became painful. Happy music felt inappropriate, but sad music put me in physical pain. Again, a small comfort that was ripped away from me. Slowly, I began to realize that I would never be the same person again. Even if I brought myself to a point where I could watch my favorite movies once more, these moments would never just be an aspect of storytelling to me. They would be reflections of my own grief. I felt as though a cloth had been removed from my eyes. My brother writes and plays music, solely instrumental, and I found myself listening to that when I needed a break from the silence. I have listened to his playlist repeatedly while writing this little book. I couldn't handle social media. The idea of mindlessly scrolling, talking about anything besides Michael, somehow felt like an insult to his memory. However, I especially could not handle scrolling through because I had friends who either were currently pregnant or had given birth within the past few months. I would log on long enough to make a post updating my friends and loved ones, then logged off. People messaged me, and I appreciated them for reaching out to give their condolences. A few had experienced what I was going through, most didn't, but everyone knew how badly I wanted the child and the lengths I had gone to make it happen. Everyone knew how excited I was to finally be pregnant. So everyone expressed their heartbreak when they found out what happened to my son. A lot of my friends offered to bring me food, but in those first few days, I didn't want to see anyone. Having a barrage of people come over to openly comfort me sounded like torture because I knew I would end up crying each and every time. I wore only sweatpants and large t shirts. My regular clothes wouldn't fit, but I couldn't look at my maternity clothes. Sweatpants felt like a neutral ground. They too became a form of comfort. At some point, I realized how little I wanted to go back to wearing my regular clothes, as if they were the final indication that my body had completely moved on from Michael. I had mixed feelings about my stomach shrieking, as I have already expressed. Mostly it was the sense of betrayal that I continued to experience. I didn't want my body to heal because it's like, okay, he's gone, time to move on. Like physically, you're being told to move on. But also, I had wanted to hide from the world until my stomach had gone down a little. I did not want unknowing strangers making any kinds of comments, positive or not. My jealousy came back a thousandfold. I hated the very sight of pregnant people. I would have the deepest urge to rip off each baby on board sticker I saw on cars. I could not bring myself to walk past the baby aisle in stores. I'm still like this. I can handle seeing I can handle seeing babies, like strangers' babies, on a good day. But then there are some days I can't. If I see a pregnant person, I have to avert my gaze, and then I still like my friends who were pregnant or whatever, like I still have them blocked on social media. I'm like, I cannot see this. All right, like I have family members who have given birth and I don't even know the sex of their child. I'm like, I'm sorry, I cannot process this. I have been told from my therapist that's normal. These had been a source of sadness for me in the past, a reminder of what I could not have. For a brief time I was pregnant, they finally became a place of excitement and peace. Now they were unbearable. Time between my mother going back home and myself returning as well was a complete blur. I don't remember too many specific details. I could barely remember what day of the week it was. I took quite a few naps, which was caused by my lack of sleeping at night. These naps did little to fix my broken sleep schedule, unfortunately. My appetite was slowly coming back. The hardest meal was breakfast. I had gone several months of eating near constantly for my baby, and now it was as if I had been put back into the first trimester because all I could handle in the morning was a few bites of yogurt. I had a consultation for therapy over the phone. The lady I was speaking to came up with what they called a safety plan because I admitted to still having suicidal thoughts. Again, I didn't believe I would act upon them. I just missed Michael so much. I didn't care if I lived or died if it meant not being with him. She told me that the earliest they could schedule me was with my soon to be regular therapist was a month away. Then she set me up for something called bridge therapy, which meant that they would schedule me with any available doctor for sessions until my real appointment. Beyond that, I threw myself into my art, including this book. I knew I was going to write this ever since I was lying in that hospital bed waiting to go into labor and wondering how I would put this experience into words. Artists are strange creatures like that. Again, it was like I could either focus on how I'm going to write this on a book, or I could focus on what's actually happening to me. And it was just my brain just went, nope, we're not doing that second option. At first, I tried to write immediately in the morning, but this was alongside the speech I was planning to give at Michael's funeral, and the two combined were too much at the beginning of the day. So I started waiting until evening. However, time would often get away from me, and then I wasn't writing much of anything. I was afraid to go on walks. I was scared of the places my mind would go when I left alone. Half of me wanted to listen only to songs that made me cry. Half of me wanted to have a distraction for a little while. Neither side seemed to win. The funeral home called twice to inform me that they had yet to receive Michael's remains from the hospital. The doctors told me that the autopsy would take around 3 days, but at this point it had been over a week. I hoped that the delay meant they found something. I've heard of many parents who were never given a designated answer as to why their child died. I wanted to know what happened to Michael and if there were ways to prevent this from happening again. Then one miscarriage later. In the meantime, I received test results online. While prepping for labor, the nurses had taken samples of my blood to see if they could find any reasoning for my stillbirth. My heart sank when I read normal over and over again. Yes, on the surface, this would appear to be a positive, yet it did not give me clarity. There was only one test which came back high, and it was for the antibody called cardiolipin. I looked up what it was and read that this was the cause of blood clots and miscarriages. Immediately, I asked my OB about it. She let me know that the tests for this antibody had to be done twice before it could be considered conclusive, and that the tests had to be 12 weeks apart. 3 months I would have to wait until knowing if this played a factor in Michael's death. My OB did not seem convinced as I was, but it seemed like quite the significant coincidence. I continuously texted my nurse friend asking her a variety of questions. She responded to the best of her ability, but since I was not, in fact, a patient of hers, she was unable to give me direct answers. I did end up being right. I don't think that's written in here because I got that second test after his funeral, but I was right. You see the theme? You see the theme that, like, again, if this was a novel, an editor would say it lacks subtlety, but that is the irony of reality. I scheduled appointments with my OB and the fertility clinic. Both were over a month away. It was agonizing to wait. I had been planning my year around there being a baby within the next couple of months. Now I had to start all over again to even remotely get back to that dream. Again, this was not a means of replacing Michael. If I could revive Michael and put him back in my womb, I would have done that without question. I just wasn't ready to give up on my family. Which again, I have researched, and that's like a common reaction. People who have stillborns and miscarriages, there's that urge to get pregnant again right away because it's like you hate your body, you feel broken in the jealousy, and you feel like you won't be normal again and have peace again until you're pregnant again. And I've been reading for like what, yeah, nearly 2 hours, so my throat's getting crackly. The results from Michael's autopsy came in at last. I did not fully understand it as the wording was heavily medicinal and scientific in nature, but I got the gist of it. The parts I didn't comprehend, I asked my nurse friend to explain. Essentially, Michael had died from a mixture of a placenta abruption, blood clots in his cord, and on top of that, the doctors suspected that that a cord accident may have occurred. It was nothing that I could have caused. It was a giant freak accident. Although now that I know, because essentially I was diagnosed with something called APS. And there are two types: the types that cause you blood clots, and the second one, which is asymptomatic except in pregnancy. So I don't think I mentioned it in this book because again that happened after his funeral, so after this book was written. But all those blood tests and no one caught that, which I did speak to a hematologist recently and he told me that there's been a history of overdiagnosing for APS, which I forget what it stands for, don't ask me, I'm not a doctor. um But so he said that they needed both blood tests and a clinical reason before diagnosing. And if I had just gotten the blood test, they would not have diagnosed me with APS. My son was the clinical portion. So, yeah, life is so fucking funny. I felt a small sense of closure in knowing what had happened to him. No one was able to tell me if these were elements which could have been prevented in the future, however. I would have to wait and see. Well, yeah. Apparently, I just need blood thinners, but they did not give me those blood thinners for my second pregnancy, and that's why that baby died at I'm sorry, at 7 weeks. My second baby never developed a heartbeat, it never embedded. It was a chemical pregnancy, so eventually it just fell out of me. Um, so, and now currently what I'm dealing with is the doctors still not wanting to give me blood thinners because they're worried that if I miscarry again, I'm going to bleed more. And I'm like, but the blood thinners are to prevent the miscarriage. So it's just, again, I love it when medical professionals are saying, oh, we don't know, wait and see. Like, oh, you got us, we don't know. And then the people who do know are the ones trying to sell you snake oil, because when you do go online and look up like what to do for like for, because it's like, I know what's going on, my APS caused his death, etc. So like, how do I treat it? And it's like Reddit and snake oil sellers. So it's just like it is so goddamn frustrating. So finally, the week ended and I headed home. The trip went uneventful, save for one small moment during the flight. The airline offered movies, so I flipped through their collection and picked the film Chicago. I thought this would be safe enough, despite the later plot line, where Roxy fakes a pregnancy. For the most half, it was, until towards the end when she tells her husband how there would be no baby. I couldn't bring myself to hear that line, just as I had with The Little Mermaid. Actually, recently rewatched Chicago, and I once again muted it at that line. I could, it took me right back to that airplane. My parents picked me up from the airport, and we all drove back to their house. I felt as though time had learned to slow down a little for me, allowing me to breathe. I would wake up in the morning, see my mother at her laptop, and I would bring down my own and start writing this little book. I cried writing out portions of this, but in those days it had finally become a form of release, getting my words out there and on a page. Being back in my hometown is always a strange sensation. I don't have a lot of love for it, hence why I ended up moving so far away as an adult. Usually, I would be caught somewhere between nostalgia and a reminder that this was the place I had been depressed for the better half of 15 years. Now I was caught between a mixture of emotions I had no names for. That Sunday, we went to visit my sister and her husband. They had recently adopted a golden retriever puppy, and I was anxious to meet her. She was the sweetest thing, as one would expect, but she seemed to be in tune with my sadness. I would find myself sitting down, gazing out at nothing in particular, trying to wrap my head around what exactly had happened to me. And then this unassuming dog would approach me and lick my face, as though her kisses were the cure. Her innocence brightened my spirits. Later on that afternoon, my brother called and we had a chat with the full family. I decided it was time to bring up the funeral. I asked my brother, or rather, I was crying so hard, and had my parents ask him if he would be willing to sing at the funeral. He said yes without hesitation. We set a date. I told them that there was a Unitarian church where I wanted it to be held and that I would be in contact with them later on in the week. Then it hit me that I was planning my son's funeral, something I never thought I would have to do, something I felt I never should have had to do. I thought about how when my nephew would come to visit me later on in the year, there would be no baby for him to play with. I had that moment burned in my mind's eye vividly of my toddler nephew leaning down or being held up and seeing my son for the first time. I imagined his smile as he grasped the concept of this smaller child being around. I pictured the inquisitive look on my son that he would have as his brain worked to understand. It's hard to let go and accept that this would never happen. When my nephew came to see me, he would be meeting an urn instead. I wept bitterly in the arms of my mother and sister. It was difficult to be around people who knew because it would lead to times like this, the reminder that they would never meet my son. Monday night, a childhood friend took me out to dinner. Hers was a welcome presence. We talked about a lot of things, but I mostly brought up Michael. I told her about his personality traits, how he had hidden his face during one of the ultrasounds, how he used to kick me when I laid back. I talked about his death, my labor, being able to hold him. My friend listened patiently as I recounted the details about my son. We shared some similarities within our grief. I told her how mine felt like waves, how sometimes I'm perfectly fine, and then a moment later I could be in tears. I mentioned the little things that were triggers for me now, how there were movies I could no longer watch and songs that had become painful to listen to. The two of us lost track of time, and I did not return to my parents' home until late that night. As strange as it felt being back in my childhood house, I feared returning to my home. It felt as though the bubble was about to burst again, and that I was heading back to a reality I wasn't ready for. My mother expressed similar concerns, worried that it was too soon for me to be heading out. However, my roommates were returning from their vacation, and I had to help with the move. It seemed like such a silly reason to go back in hindsight. I can't take proper time off to mourn my son because I need to help with the moving process. That's the thing about life, though, it pauses for no one. The flight home went smoothly enough, except that my anxiety spiked to levels it never had prior. As I sat back in my chair, acknowledging that the plane wouldn't land for 4 hours, my heart became cold. And I don't mean metaphorically, my heart was dropping in temperature. I felt at my chest, which was normal. It was my inside that had chilled. I still don't have a reason for that. Like, just, it quite literally felt like my physical heart in my chest was freezing. It just, I don't have a reason for that. I never got checked out for that. Probably should have, but I'm alive, aren't I? I began to worry that I was about to have a heart attack. Without the ability to call my mother or the 24/7 hotline, I was completely lost. I did not want to say anything, not out of fear of judgment, but because if something was truly wrong, there was a risk that they would land the plane and take me to a hospital. And that was the last place I wanted to be, especially so far from my home. All I could think of to do was take a nap. The sleep did its usual trick of convincing me that everything would be all right in the end. The waves had receded, and once more I felt decent. The coldness inside me dissipated. Then, as I continued to sit there and comprehend that the flight was another 2 hours, the anxiety built itself up again. I just went back to sleep. When I got home, it was after midnight. Anyone I would be able to talk to was in bed, so I called the 24/7 hotline. I needed to speak through the anxiety enough to get to sleep. Over the next few days, my roommates returned from their trip and my anxiety began to recede. Then I went to get Michael's footprints tattooed on my shoulder. I had always meant to get a tattoo for my son, but I had planned for it on being his birth date. Now I wanted a way for him to always be with me. I also wanted a way for people to see what I was enduring, not necessarily for pity's sake, but rather as a means of avoiding awkward questions. If I went on to have other kids, for example, and people asked me things such as how many children I had, I would be able to point to this as a means of answering, which this does not always work. People do not always realize that this is like a memorial tattoo. So I'm debating on if I want to get like angel wings around it or like just write RIP or something to make it a little clearer because I avoid certain social situations where it's like I was around these people when I was pregnant, but then like it was a social situation where they were not like close friends, where I would be in contact with them after this social situation, and they are not aware of the stillborn. And the last thing I want to do is go there and have the, oh, how's the baby? So, but like, for example, I went to a book club. And I was pregnant and I was excited about the pregnancy. And of course, I mentioned it because I was visibly pregnant. Um, and then the next time I came back to this book club was after he had passed, and I had this tattoo. And I go in, and of course, someone, oh, did you have your baby? And I just pointed, quietly, solemnly pointed. And she's like, well, yeah, I see this, and I don't see this. So congratulations. And I went, no, it's not that kind of tattoo. And she's like, oh, I just shouldn't have said anything. It's like, I get so tired of being a learning experience. So I don't know. God, my naivete. For the tattoo itself, I had taken a picture of the footprints from the hospital had provided and added his name above it in a font I found visually appealing. The artist did not ask any questions beyond logistics, such as how big I wanted it and where I wanted it placed. I was nervous about the pain. This was not my first tattoo, however. The other one I had was small and took a short amount of time. I reminded myself that I had gone into labor, arguably the worst pain someone with a uterus can endure. Although, like, again, my knee injury was worse. Okay. Like the fact that I was afraid of a tattoo pain after going through labor should tell you how powerful an epidural is. I also reminded myself that an hour or so of pain was worth it to have this permanent reminder of Michael. The pain ended up not being so bad. I gritted my teeth at certain points, but for the most half, it was more uncomfortable than anything else. I ended up crying throughout the process, however. As the artist finished both feet and moved on to his name, the weight of the situation started to crash down on me. This was the result of my pregnancy. Not a baby, just a tattoo. Afterwards, he let me go to the mirror and see how I liked it. I cried once more. I apologized, telling him that it wasn't his fault, that this was just an emotional tattoo. He told me that he was sorry for my loss and continued to let me cry it out. I noticed he had a picture of a young girl in his office. I'm assuming his daughter or maybe a niece. Either way, he was very intuitive to what I was going through. And this part is going to sound bizarre, and I'm not entirely sure how to explain it, but in the days of my tattoo healing, it smelled like Michael. I'm assuming it has something to do with the congealing blood. Michael had a baby smell, but he also carried the scent of afterbirth. I had too when I was bleeding. It's not a scent that you will ever forget, but being able to carry it over my nostrils once more filled me with gratitude. I felt the strong sense of Michael's presence once more. I did not let the reminder end with the tattoo, however. My roommates and I went along with our move. The physical labor gave me something to focus on, goals I could make throughout the day. Plus, the new location gave me a different mindset. This was no longer the place where I had stayed in bed for 2 days after the death of my son, and I began to feel a little better. Before we had even begun this move, however, I had ordered a little hutch which I wanted to house all of Michael's belongings. The blankets he had at the hospital, his little yellow hat, the pottery I had sculpted, the few toys and clothes I had bought in anticipation, and of course his urn. This hutch now resides in the corner of my new room, which I would have recorded in there, but I have four budgies in my bedroom and they would not be quiet for this. So, but yeah, his hutch is in my bedroom and I see it every day. I am thankful every day that my friend had convinced me to hold Michael. I am also grateful that we took pictures of our time together, as these are now my most prized possessions right after his urn. I look at him each day, my baby with his little yellow hat. I look at him sticking out his tongue and then opening his mouth. I look at the smile I wore while holding him, seeing the amount of love I have for this baby. That's the only reason this hurts as much as it does, because I love Michael more than anything. I am unsure where to end this chapter. For me, everything feels like the aftermath. There are now only two parts of my life: before my son's death, when I had been the person I always was, and after, with the person I am now. As of writing this, his funeral has not been held. I keep going back and forth on whether or not to hold this book until afterwards so the funeral can be included, or finishing the book beforehand so a copy of it could be present. Ultimately, I chose the latter. I am sharing Michael's story with the world, but I think that there are still certain amounts of privacy I wish to have on the matter. I'm sure his funeral will work out fine, but I honestly don't care. No matter how lovely his funeral ends up being, I would rather have my son. All right, that was the longest chapter. We are over 2 hours in. Okay, this one, oh God. So, chapter 6 is called The Guilt, because, tragedies like grief is not pretty. I think I've said that a few times in the past 2 hours. It's very ugly, and you have very ugly thoughts. And I've had my fair share. And I just felt it was important to describe, especially now that I have heard other people's stories and have them express and realize that this is just typical. There's no protocol for this, is there? So, okay. I have been told by medical professionals repeatedly that what happened was not my fault. It doesn't really matter, however. This does nothing to change how you feel about yourself in this situation. I've blamed my body for years and its inability to give me a child. This time it killed mine. And then healed quickly, like he was never there. And I will never forgive it. I did heal like super quickly after. I think I like was postpartum for 1 or 2 months, and then I got my period back pretty quickly and it regulated like immediately. I was just like, wow, cool. I have also been told that something good will come for this, and I hate that thought. Nothing good will ever come from this. There is no reason as to why it happened. It was just a tragic accident. I will never find a silver lining. I have hope for the future that good things can still happen in my life, but not as the result of this. I feel compelled to state this up front because of what I'm going to say. Grief is an interesting thing. You don't know how you'll react to certain situations. There are a million different thoughts running through your head simultaneously. Not all of those thoughts are ones you will be proud of or feel are appropriate to have. For example, apparently it's not socially acceptable to call your friends and relatives babies those things. But those are the kind of thoughts you have. No matter how I feel about my body, my thoughts are a whole other matter. I do think it might be for the best to be honest about them, however. This chapter is more for the people out there who have gone through what I have and maybe shared a thought or two which they are not proud of. And Michael, I am so, so sorry. Just know that no matter what runs through my head, I would rather have you. Always and forever, I would rather have you. As mentioned in a previous chapter, the most frustrating aspect I had to deal with during my pregnancy had been the paperwork needed for my maternity leave. Every time I called or emailed for instructions, I was giving new ones which contradicted the old ones given. Every time I turned something in, it would be handed back to me alongside more paperwork to complete. I had worked on this for months and was getting nowhere. I began to fear that I would not be able to finish in time. More than that, I worried about how short my time off would be 6 weeks for vaginal delivery and 8 weeks for a C section. 6 weeks. I had waited 10 years for my baby, and I would get less than 2 months to be with him. Who knows how lucid I would be during that period, considering my body would need to heal and my sleep schedule would be off drastically. The solution for me seems simple enough. The state of California offers family leave, which is a bonus 12 weeks off to bond with the child. I have been asked for information regarding this and had planned to use it. However, I realized that family leave was only offered to employees who had spent at least a year within the company. I had only started working a few months prior. There would be no way I'd be approved, which meant that I would most likely be forced to return to work after the bare minimum time of healing. When Michael died, it crossed my mind that now I would at least be able to get that 1 year requirement for the next child. I was also relieved that I no longer had to worry about the paperwork. I thought about my fears of labor. Since Michael had been so small, it had gone easily and quickly. I began to think of it as a trial run, that at least my anxiety about this had been somewhat diminished. And then we began our move. I had been concerned about how useless I would be during this process, considering I wouldn't be able to lift anything up. Now that I was no longer pregnant, it wasn't an issue anymore. There are people who have been colder, crueler thoughts, who have told colder and crueler thoughts in regards to their children. But every time I wondered to myself, well, at least now it felt like I was considering Michael to be an inconvenience. Parents have an infinite number of reasons to have children, but I don't think a factor is on how convenient a child can be. I knew the weight of bringing a baby into this world. I knew that it meant for the rest of my life I would have to consider how my actions impacted my child. But it was something I was and still am willing to take on. But a part of me was scared, in the same way most of first time parents are scared. I have thought about how I would be able to make it through the rest of the year. I had planned on having Michael with me during the major holidays for my birthday. Normally, I make big plans for my birthday, such as trips or Broadway shows. This year, I had planned on taking it easy since I would only be a few weeks out of labor. Now that Michael was gone, I tried to think of fun plans I could do as a means to get my mind off of the situation. until it occurred to me that I would only be able to do these fun things because my son was dead. You know how that episode of BoJack where he goes, "I just got a free churro because my mom died." It's like I have those thoughts constantly. These thoughts would occasionally rear their ugly heads into my mind, forcing me to shove them back. On a more personal note, back before I was able to start trying to conceive, I was filled with anger. I directed this by reading books and consuming other medias about miscarriages. Reading about infertility itself did not seem to carry the same weight as miscarriages for me. I did not have fertility issues, or so I thought at the time. I actually don't. That's the monkey paws of me. I can get pregnant super post polyps. I am actually super fertile. It's keeping them alive that I have trouble with. All right, but I just needed a donor. Reading about how infertility treatment, in particular stories about the queer community, seemed to be more about the politics around it than the personal demon I felt resting on my shoulder. I'm not saying that I never read about infertility, but reading about miscarriages matched my mindset much closer. The anger at your own body, the betrayal. There were times when I actively sought out books for the sole purpose of reading about miscarriages. So many of my own stories, although several of them never written, have revolved around grieving mothers who have lost their children. In some ways, the pain I feel is nothing new. In creating these stories, I have often imagined what has been called the unimaginable, how I might feel in this scenario. Now I know, and I feel as though the universe is punishing me for my empathy. And this is magical thinking, I am aware of that, but a part of me still feels as though my morbid fascination cursed me, that I needed to understand firsthand the pain I had been consuming as a coping mechanism. Prior to Michael's death, I had been reading about the Greek mythological creature Lamia for reasons. How she was a woman who had an affair with Zeus, and in a jealous rage, Hera had cursed this woman, killing her children and transforming her into a monster. Now Lamia wanders, killing the children of others. I never understood why she did that. The myth says that she killed these children out of grief, which did not make sense to me. Did she not understand the pain she felt that she was now inflicting? And in my darkest moments, I can say that I now understand her thought process. I would never wish or bring physical harm to anyone else, especially a child. All I am saying is that I now felt empathy towards an archetype which before I had only held pity and confusion. This is what I mean about being honest. These are the dark, ugly thoughts you get when you're grieving. The anger I feel towards even the sight of a pregnant person is so consuming that I have to avert my gaze. I cannot hear about my friends and loved ones who are pregnant or have a new baby. A part of me wants them to know the pain I am in. A selfish, awful part of me wonders, why do you get to be happy? Again, nothing I would act upon, just ugly thoughts when I'm left alone. And those have not gone away. I can't say I feel guilty for these thoughts. I really don't. I only feel guilty towards my actions and mindsets in regards to Michael, but they are here. And to anyone else who has had these thoughts, you aren't alone and you aren't a bad person for your emotions. Grief is not easy for anyone. And then, of course, there's the cramp. I will spend the rest of my life wondering if that was the start of the abruption. I will spend the rest of my life wondering if I had gone to the hospital sooner, could medical science have saved my son? Some part of me wonders that, if not, perhaps this was the best outcome. If doctors had caught this and needed to induce Michael out of me right then, would he have survived? Again, he was a pound and 3 ounces. Like if he was an inky baby, it's like, would he have survived? Or would I have looked at my tiny baby hooked up to oxygen, praying and begging only for him to die anyway? I will never know. I will never stop wondering about it either. I wish I could have seen the color of his eyes. All right, so this next chapter, I think it's the shortest. Yeah, it's the short. Okay, there's 2 more chapters, so we're almost done. And this one, it kind of throws people at first when they see it, which is fair. So, chapter 7 is called The Jokes, and the title of this chapter probably seems crass. However, if you're laying out the ugly truths about this situation, then I want to talk about the parts of Michael's story which made me happy, because being pregnant with him was the happiest time of my life. I honestly love talking about my time in labor. I find it funny how convinced the doctors were that it would be another 12 to 24 hours before anything significant would happen after my final dose of medicine. Her exact words had been, I can say with confidence. And then my little Michael was born only 4 short hours later. That's so within his personality. Michael, the boy who punched the doctor doing the ultrasound, turning over in my womb to get out of it. Of course, this boy was on no one's watch except for his own, and we have that in common. Even after he was out, we found amusement in the little facial features he was able to make. First, his lips parted and we saw his little tongue. Then his mouth opened completely and he appeared to be yawning. We called him Baby Bird then. We lifted him up next, his jaws shut and his lips pursed. We teased that he was pouting or giving us kissy lips because, like that. I booped his nose once or twice, saying how he would have hated that. He would have batted at me. I was never going to see my son again. I had to be able to play with him the time that I had. I love my pictures with Michael, but the first few we took are hard for me to look at. Not for any serious reason, but because I had been so exhausted. I tried to give my happiest smile, but I look like I'm about to pass out. I do. It's like I'm holding him trying to look happy and I'm just like, oh. Like so but it makes me smile and it's like, oh yeah, I thought I looked so happy, but no, I looked drugged because I was. People often tell me that they don't know what to say about my situation or that there are no words. But nothing anyone could say will ever be as bad as when I got home from the hospital and was contacted by HR. As I said in a previous chapter, my principal and secretary were calling me about paperwork, and this had angered me because it was right as I exited the hospital. These women were aware of the situation I was in, and I felt their actions were inconsiderate, because they were. I don't blame the woman from HR for contacting me, however, because she had no idea what was happening. She was calling in regards to my medical leave and asked what was the nature of my disability. I broke down as I explained that I had a stillborn. This woman, most likely out of habit, ended the call by saying, "Have a nice day." I could hear the regret in her voice as she said it. I have no doubt that she kicked herself for it afterwards, but frankly, after all of the "I'm so sorry for your loss" sentiments I had been getting over and over again, being told to have a nice day did produce a giggle out of me. Lastly, I wouldn't call this a joke per se, but every time I am faced with a difficult or stressful situation, I think to myself, I have already lived through the worst day of my life. How bad could this be? I'm still like that. Like, I'm dealing with more work related drama and I'm just like, I do not care. Like my other coworkers are stressing out and I'm like, I don't care. I have lived through worse. Like this is whatever. I don't want to jinx myself with this mindset, but I truly have not felt genuine stress outside of this. Everything else is so minimal in comparison. All right, we're on the last chapter and it's very short. It's just 2 pages. So, okay. This one is just called The End. I don't really know where to end this book. A part of me wants to continue writing it forever. It has been yet another connection to Michael. I think about him every day. Another part of me wants this book to be done so I could put it in his memorial hutch. I want this story to be out in the world because it's Michael's story. I want people to know him the way I did. More than that, I worry. As I write this, I feel a shift in my brain. I'm not sure if it's part of the grieving process or if it's my mind way of trying to protect me, but I've reached a sense of denial, not the "no, my son isn't dead" sort of way, but rather an almost out of body experience. As if this happened to someone else, I find myself asking, was I ever actually pregnant? Did I really have a stillborn? Which I think is typical. This is this isn't a spoiler if you can do math, but for the show Yellow Jackets, there was a stillborn, and that character was also asking, was he even real? And that somehow was not triggering for me. I just felt empathy. I was like, oh, someone on this writing staff had a stillborn because this is way too accurate. Anyway, I dreamed about this for so long, imagined in my head many times. For it to be ripped away when I was this close feels simultaneously like a slap in the face, and exactly as I have been feeling the past several years. I want to write this down while it's fresh in my mind, so that as the years become decades, if I reach a point in my life where my memory goes foggy, I'll have this to bring me right back to it, the pleasant and the ugly, the happiness and the trauma. I want to remember it all because it's all Michael. I've heard it said that time heals everything. I've been told during other moments of my life, but not with this. No one has said that time will heal this wound. We know it won't. I will wear this on me as permanent as the tattoo on my shoulder. Yeah, no one has ever said that I will be over this pain. They just said the grief dulls, it becomes a scar rather than a fresh wound. But no one has told me, oh, you'll move past this. I wonder about the pain I have yet to endure in my life, when the older generations of my family begin to die, when my friends begin to die. I've wondered how I will be able to manage to find meaning in life without the people who have shaped me, but I can't imagine that it would be any worse than this. Maybe I'll be the first to die. I don't have a fear of death anymore if it means seeing my son again, and I do believe that his soul still exists. To end this little book, I would like to mention what not to say to a grieving parent, or at least these are true for me. A lot of people have called me strong. They see me diving into my art, my writing, moving, and to them it's strength. I wish they would stop, though. I'm not strong. There's no strength in living in any of this. I'm simply still here. Do not ever say to me that I will someday make a great mom. I am already a mom. I have a son. He lived and grew inside me. He kicked at me, and I gave birth to him. He has an urn and a death certificate. I wear his tiny footprints on my skin. I am already a mom. I am Michael's mom. And Michael, my sweet baby boy, you will always be my son. I love you. That's the end. And I have a picture of us from the hospital, so that's my favorite picture because I look lucid. And also just like you can see him in his little yellow hat and the blankies. So yeah, that is everything. I don't really have a way to end this. Just thank you everyone who stopped by for this. I know it's not an easy subject matter. I appreciate everyone, yeah, for stopping by. So okay, I'm gonna go ahead and end the stream now. Everyone have a wonderful day.